When 7 quilts were all that stood between survival and ruin, Clara Whitmore made a choice that would reshape 2 lives forever. A woman with empty pockets, a rancher with secrets buried deeper than fence posts. One transaction that wasn't really about quilts at all. What happens when desperation meets opportunity on a dusty street where nobody expects miracles? Stay with me until the end of this story. You won't believe where these 7 pieces of fabric lead. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far Clara's journey travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. The wagon wheel hit another rut, and Clara Whitmore gripped the seat board hard enough that her knuckles went white. Not that it mattered. White knuckles, dirty hands, blistered palms, none of it registered anymore. Pain had become wallpaper. You stopped noticing it after the first 100 miles. The town appeared like a mirage through the heat shimmer, all crooked rooflines and sun-bleached wood. She didn't know its name, hadn't bothered to learn it. This was simply the place where the road ended, and her options ran out in the same breath. 7 quilts. That's what she had left. 7 pieces of her mother's handiwork, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked behind the wagon seat like they were worth something. Maybe they were. Maybe they weren't. Clara had stopped being able to tell the difference between value and sentimentality somewhere around the 3rd town that turned her away. Her father's debts had been specific and merciless. The creditors had taken the house first. That made sense. It was the biggest thing. Then the furniture, which hurt more than Clara expected because her mother's hands had touched every piece. Then the livestock, the tools, the wagon that actually ran properly. By the time they'd finished picking the bones of Thomas Whitmore's legacy, Clara was left with a broken wagon, a horse that should have been retired 5 years ago, and whatever she could carry. She'd sold most of it. The good clothes went first, bringing enough money for 2 weeks of beans and hard bread. Her mother's jewelry, what little there was, bought her passage through towns that charged tolls for drifters. Her father's books, his reading glasses, the silver compass he'd carried during the war, all of it converted into coins that disappeared faster than morning frost. Now there were quilts, just quilts. The horse, a gray mare named Ashes, because that's exactly what color she was, pulled the wagon down what passed for a main street. Clara counted 12 buildings that looked operational. A general store. A saloon that had seen better decades. Something that might have been a boarding house or might have been abandoned entirely. The sign was too faded to tell. A blacksmith shop where the forge wasn't even lit. Not promising. But promising wasn't something Clara could afford to require anymore. She needed possible, and even that was negotiable. She pulled Ashes to a stop in front of the general store. The owner, a heavy-set woman with flour dust on her apron and suspicion in her eyes, stepped onto the porch before Clara's boots hit the dirt. "We don't buy from travelers," the woman said. Not hostile exactly, just stating facts. "I'm not selling goods, I'm selling quilts. Handmade, my mother's work." The woman's expression didn't change. "Don't need quilts, season's wrong, and folks here make their own." Clara had heard variations of this speech in 4 towns already. She didn't argue. Arguing cost energy she didn't have. "Anyone else in town who might—" "Nope." The woman crossed her arms. "You might try the next settlement, 30 miles east. They get more traffic." 30 miles. Clara looked at Ashes, who was currently demonstrating her commitment to minimal effort by trying to sleep standing up. 30 miles might as well be 300. "Thank you for your time." She climbed back onto the wagon seat, something sharp twisting in her chest. Not panic. Not yet. Panic was a luxury. This was just calculation. She had enough food for maybe 3 days if she stretched it. The horse needed grain she couldn't afford. And 30 miles assumed the wagon would hold together, which seemed generous given the sound the left rear wheel had been making since yesterday. Clara guided Ashes back up the street, scanning for anything she'd missed. That's when she saw it. Not another shop, but a road leading out of town in a different direction. And at the end of that road, maybe half a mile distant, stood something that didn't match the town's general air of decay. A ranch. Not a big operation by the standards of the cattle outfits back east, but substantial. Fences that looked maintained. Outbuildings that had actual paint. A main house that stood 2 stories tall with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Clara had no business at a ranch. Ranches didn't buy quilts. Ranches made their own everything, same as the woman at the general store had said. But she turned Ashes toward it anyway. What else was she going to do? The road to the ranch was better maintained than the town's main street, which told Clara something about priorities in this region. Ashes perked up slightly, possibly because the smoother ground meant less work, or possibly because she'd spotted the water trough near the barn and was already planning her approach. Clara had made it about halfway when a man stepped out from behind one of the outbuildings. He wasn't particularly tall, but he moved like height wasn't a requirement for presence. Dark hair, darker eyes, and the kind of weathered face that came from actual work rather than affectation. His clothes were practical, worn in all the right places, clean in a way that suggested routine rather than special occasion. He carried a coil of rope over one shoulder and regarded Clara's approach with the expression of someone interrupting their own thoughts. "Lost?" he called when she was close enough for a conversation. "No, sir, just hopeful." That got a flicker of something. Amusement, maybe, or possibly just recognition that hopeful was a peculiar word choice. He walked closer, his gait easy but deliberate. When he reached the wagon, he looked at Ashes first, then at Clara. Hopeful about what, specifically? Clara had prepared a speech, something about quality craftsmanship and reasonable prices, and how every home needed good quilts. She'd practiced it in 3 towns, and it had accomplished exactly nothing, but she'd been ready to try it a 4th time. Instead, what came out was, "I need money, and you look like someone who has some." The man blinked. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, more like his mouth remembered how the expression worked and decided to give it a shot. "That's direct. I'm tired of indirect. Indirect hasn't been working." He considered this, then nodded toward the wagon bed. "What are you selling?" "Quilts. 7 of them. My mother made them. They're good work, probably better than I can sell them for, but I'm not in a position to be precious about pricing." "Can I see them?" Clara climbed down, trying not to let her stiff legs show. The man, she still didn't know his name, waited while she pulled back the oilcloth and revealed the quilts underneath. They were beautiful. That wasn't daughter's bias. It was observable fact. Her mother had possessed a rare combination of precision and artistry. These weren't just functional, they were the kind of work that made people stop and really look. Geometric patterns that played tricks with perspective. Colors that shouldn't work together but somehow did. Stitching so fine it looked like the fabric had grown that way. The man studied them without touching, his expression unreadable. Clara had learned not to interpret silence. Some people went quiet because they were impressed. Others went quiet because they were calculating how to let you down easy. "How much?" he finally asked. This was the part where Clara usually fumbled, the part where she tried to name a price that was low enough to be attractive, but high enough to mean something, and ended up with a number that satisfied nobody. "For all 7? $40. It was probably too low. It was definitely less than they were worth. But $40 would get her to the next territory with enough left over to not starve on the way. The man looked at her, then back at the quilts, then at her again. $40, he repeated. "Yes, sir." "You'll take $40 for 7 quilts that probably took your mother months to make." Clara's throat tightened. "I'll take what I can get." He was quiet for another long moment. Then he said something that made Clara think she'd misheard him. "I'll give you 70. What? $70. For all 7. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. Clara's brain stuttered. "I said 40. I heard you. I'm saying 70. That's not how bargaining works." The man's mouth did that almost smile thing again. "Who's bargaining? I'm buying quilts. You're selling them. $70 seems fair for the work." "Fair?" The word sat strange in Clara's mind. She'd stopped expecting fairness around the same time the creditors had started taking her mother's furniture. "I don't understand." "What's confusing? You need money. I have money. These are quality goods." Transaction seemed straightforward, but it wasn't straightforward. Nothing had been straightforward since her father died. People didn't just offer more than asking price. They didn't look at desperate women on broken wagons and decide to make their day easier. "Why?" Clara heard herself ask. The man shrugged, a small movement that somehow conveyed volumes. "Why not? You're clearly in a tight spot. I can afford to help. And frankly, these are good enough that I'm probably still getting a bargain at 70. He pulled out a leather wallet, actual leather, not the worn canvas most people carried, and counted out bills. Real money. Not coins, not scrip, but actual currency that would spend anywhere. Clara's hands shook when she took it. She tried to hide the tremor, but she saw his eyes track the movement. He didn't comment. "Thank you," she managed. It came out rougher than intended. "You have a place to stay tonight?" The question caught her sideways. "I'll find something." "That's not what I asked?" Clara bristled despite herself. "I don't need charity." "Didn't offer charity. Asked a question." He gestured toward the house. "I've got a bunkhouse that's empty except for dust. You're welcome to it for the night. There's a water pump outside and the stove works. No charge, no strings. Just a dry place to sleep." Every instinct Clara had screamed caution. You didn't accept favors from strangers. You didn't put yourself in vulnerable positions. You didn't trust men who appeared out of nowhere offering money and shelter. But she was so tired. And Ashes needed rest even more than she did, and $70 wouldn't mean much if she collapsed on the road tomorrow. "Just tonight," she heard herself say. "Just tonight," he agreed. Then he stuck out his hand. "Caleb Rourke, I own this place." Clara shook his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. Working hands, calloused in all the places that meant honest labor. "Clara Whitmore." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Whitmore." He loaded the quilts with the kind of care that suggested he actually understood their value, then gestured toward the barn. "You can stable your horse in there. She looks like she could use grain." "I can't afford. Already bought 7 quilts from you. Think I can spare some grain without going bankrupt." Clara wanted to argue. The impulse came from some deep place that had been taught pride was more important than survival. But she looked at Ashes, who was currently demonstrating the horse equivalent of total exhaustion, and the argument died. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me. Makes the whole thing awkward." But he said it without heat, almost like he was trying to put her at ease. The bunkhouse was better than advertised. Clean, furnished with a real bed frame and mattress, a wood stove that showed signs of recent maintenance, and windows that actually closed properly. Clara stood in the doorway, trying to reconcile this space with the word bunkhouse. "When's the last time anyone used this?" Caleb, who was loading wood into the stove, glanced back. "Couple months. Had a hired man staying here, but he moved on. Haven't gotten around to finding a replacement." "It's nice. It's functional." He struck a match, got the kindling going. "There's a well pump out back, water's clean, and I'll bring some food over once you're settled." "You don't have to." He held up a hand. "We're going to establish a pattern here where you say I don't have to do something and I do it anyway. Save us both time and just accept it." Despite everything, Clara felt her mouth twitch. "Bossy." "Efficient," he corrected. Then he headed for the door. "Get some rest, Miss Whitmore. You look like you haven't slept properly in a month." He was gone before she could respond. Clara stood alone in the bunkhouse, $70 in her pocket, and a bed she hadn't paid for waiting behind her. The whole situation felt surreal, like she'd crossed into some strange territory where the normal rules had been temporarily suspended. She didn't trust it, but she was too exhausted not to use it. Caleb Rourke was a man who understood routine. Wake at dawn, check the livestock, mend whatever broke yesterday, plan for what would break tomorrow. It was predictable work, which suited him fine. Predictability meant control, and control meant survival. The woman currently sleeping in his bunkhouse was the opposite of predictable. He'd bought the quilts because they were good work and she'd clearly needed the money. Simple transaction. But then she'd looked at him with those eyes that were trying so hard not to show desperation, and he'd heard himself offering the bunkhouse like he'd planned it all along. He hadn't planned it. Caleb didn't make impulsive decisions. Impulsive decisions led to complications, and complications led to people getting hurt. He'd learned that lesson young and learned it thoroughly. But something about Clara Whitmore had bypassed his usual caution. Maybe it was the way she'd asked why when he'd offered a fair price, like fairness was foreign enough to require explanation. Maybe it was the wagon that looked held together by hope and binding wire. Maybe it was just that she'd been honest about needing money instead of dancing around it. Whatever the reason, she was here now. And Caleb found himself doing something he rarely did, deviating from routine. He made extra food. Not a grand meal. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. Just beans with actual seasoning, cornbread that hadn't turned to rocks, and coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. He loaded it onto a tray and carried it across the yard to the bunkhouse. The knock got a shuffling sound. Then silence. Then, "Who is it?" "Caleb. Brought food." The door opened. Clara looked marginally more human than she had 2 hours ago. Still exhausted, but at least vertical. "You weren't kidding about the food." "Generally don't kid about food." He held out the tray. "Figured you probably hadn't eaten properly lately." She took the tray with the careful movements of someone trying not to show how hungry they were. "I ate yesterday." "That's not the same as eating properly." Clara set the tray on the small table and stared at the food like it might vanish if she looked away. "Why are you doing this?" "We're back to that question?" "It's a reasonable question." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "You showed up needing help. I can provide help. Doesn't seem complicated. People don't just help strangers." "Some people do." "In my experience, people who help strangers want something in return." It was said without accusation, just a flat statement of observed fact. Caleb recognized the tone. He'd used it himself often enough. "I don't want anything, Miss Whitmore. You can eat, sleep, and leave in the morning. Transaction complete." She studied him with an expression that was probably meant to be assessing, but mostly looked tired. "You're either genuinely kind or playing a long game I haven't figured out yet." "Could be both." That almost got a smile. "Could be." She sat down and started eating, and Caleb recognized hunger in the way she had to consciously slow herself down. He'd been there. Different circumstances, but the same fundamental need. "How long have you been on the road?" he asked. 2 months, give or take." "Where are you headed?" "Away." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was a complete answer. "Away from what?" "Debts. Memories. People who knew my father and feel entitled to opinions about how I should handle his mess." She took a drink of coffee, closed her eyes briefly. "This is really good coffee." "Secret's in the proportions." "What's the proportion?" "More coffee than you think you need, less water than seems reasonable." She did smile at that, small but genuine. It changed her face entirely. Caleb noticed and then deliberately unnoticed because that wasn't relevant to anything. "So you just drift until—" "What? The money runs out?" Clara's smile faded. "That's the general plan, yes." "Then what?" "Haven't figured that part out yet." She met his eyes. "You always this interested in strangers' business?" "Only when they park in my yard." "Fair point." She ate more beans, then asked, "What about you? You always in the habit of buying overpriced quilts and feeding drifters?" "First time, actually." "So I'm special." "You're something," Caleb agreed. He didn't elaborate on what something entailed. They sat in comfortable enough silence while Clara finished eating. When she was done, she set the fork down with the precision of someone who'd been taught proper table manners and hadn't forgotten despite everything else falling apart. "Thank you for the meal." "You're welcome." Caleb collected the tray. "Get some sleep, Miss Whitmore. Morning comes early, but you don't have to meet it if you don't want to." "I should get moving. I've imposed enough." "You've imposed nothing. And leaving exhausted is a good way to end up broken down in the middle of nowhere." He paused at the door. "Stay. One more day won't kill you. It might kill my pride." "Pride's overrated." Says the man who clearly has plenty of it. Caleb grinned despite himself. "Good night, Miss Whitmore." "Good night, Mr. Rourke." Ma. Clara woke to birdsong and the unfamiliar sensation of having slept through the night. No wagon wheels. No hard ground. No jolting awake every time ashes shifted position. Just sleep. She lay still for a moment, cataloging the situation. The bunkhouse was real. Caleb Rourke was real. The $70 in her pocket was definitely real, which meant she had to make a decision. Leave like she'd planned, or what? There wasn't an or. There was only forward, and forward meant away from here. She dressed in the cleanest clothes she had left, which wasn't saying much, and stepped outside. The ranch yard was already active. 2 men she hadn't seen yesterday were working near the barn. Caleb was nowhere visible, which felt like a relief and a disappointment in equal measure. Clara walked to where she'd stabled Ashes and found the horse looking better than she had in weeks. Someone had not only fed her, but curried her too. The wagon had been moved under a shelter, and the broken wheel had been fixed. Clara stood staring at the wagon wheel like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. The repair was recent. She could smell fresh tar on the hub. Someone had done this overnight. Noticed it was cracked. She turned to find Caleb approaching from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. You fixed my wagon. Wasn't safe to drive. Figured you'd want it functional. Clara's jaw tightened. I didn't ask you to do that. Didn't need to ask. Needed doing. I can't afford not charging you. He said it like it was obvious. You can't just keep giving me things. Why not? Because... Clara stopped, trying to find words for something that felt important, but kept sliding away from articulation. Because that's not how things work. Seems to be working fine so far. I mean, people don't just help without wanting something back. Caleb leaned against the fence, regarding her with that steady gaze that was starting to become familiar. You keep saying that. Makes me wonder what kind of people you've been dealing with. The regular kind. Maybe you've had bad luck with regular. Clara wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too confused and too aware that she was standing in a ranch yard arguing with a man who'd fed her, housed her, and fixed her wagon without asking for anything. I don't understand you, she finally said. That's fair. I don't really understand me either sometimes. He pushed off the fence. You hungry? I should go. That's not what I asked. You keep doing that. Doing what? Answering questions I didn't ask while ignoring the ones I did. Caleb smiled. Keeps conversations interesting. Come on, breakfast is ready. The main house was exactly what Clara expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Functional furniture, clean floors, sparse decoration, but there were small touches that suggested someone cared, curtains that matched, dishes that weren't chipped, a vase on the table that held wildflowers someone had actually picked. You live here alone? Clara asked, looking around. Mostly. Got 2 hands who work days but live in town. Caleb was already plating food, eggs, actual bacon, toast that looked homemade. Used to have more people, but they moved on. Why'd they leave? Better opportunities. I don't begrudge people chasing better. He set a plate in front of her, and Clara stared at it. Real food, cooked properly, served on actual china. This is too much. It's breakfast. I mean all of it. The bunkhouse, the wagon. Now this. She gestured at the plate. I don't know what you expect from me. Caleb sat down across from her with his own breakfast. I expect you to eat before it gets cold. Beyond that, I got no expectations at all. Everyone has expectations. Maybe I'm not everyone. They ate in silence. Clara tried to pace herself but failed. The food was too good and her stomach too empty. Caleb didn't comment, just refilled her coffee when it got low. Where'd you learn to cook? She asked eventually. Necessity. Can't afford to eat bad food when you're doing physical work all day. Most ranchmen I've met live on jerky and whatever doesn't fight back. I'm not most ranchmen. I'm starting to notice. Caleb's mouth quirked. That a compliment? An observation. I'll take it. Clara finished her eggs and sat back feeling more human than she had in months. Thank you for breakfast. You're welcome. Caleb cleared the plates, then turned back to her. Can I ask you something? Seems only fair given you've been interrogating me. What are you planning to do? What do you mean? I mean, where are you actually going? You said away, but away isn't a destination. Clara bristled. That's my business. It is, but I'm asking anyway. Why do you care? Because you showed up here with nothing but quilts and exhaustion, and I get the sense you don't actually have a plan beyond survival. Which is fine for short term, but it's a terrible long-term strategy. I've been surviving just fine. Caleb gave her a look that suggested he had opinions about that statement. Have you? I'm still alive. That's not the same as fine. Clara stood up, anger sparking. You don't know anything about me. I know you're running on fumes. I know you underpriced your mother's work because you're desperate. I know you've been sleeping rough and skipping meals. His voice stayed level, factual. And I know that whatever you're running from caught up with you about 2 towns ago. I'm not running. Then what do you call it? Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. Because he was right, and they both knew it. She sat back down heavily. My father died owing money to people who don't care that he's dead. They wanted the debts paid, and when I couldn't pay them, they took everything. The house, the land, everything my mother built. I've been selling off what they missed, trying to get far enough away that they forget I exist. How's that working? It was working fine until I ran out of things to sell. Caleb nodded slowly. And now I have $70 and a fixed wagon and no idea what comes next. She met his eyes. Satisfied? Not particularly. He leaned forward. What if I offered you something? Clara's guard went up immediately. What kind of something? A job. She blinked. What? There's an empty shop in town. Been empty for a year. Owners willing to rent it cheap. You could set up there, sell quilts, do alterations, whatever sewing work people need. He said it casually, like he was discussing weather. I don't have money for rent. First 3 months free. After that, we work out terms based on what you're actually making. Why would anyone agree to that? Because I own the building and I can agree to whatever I want. Clara stared at him. You own... How much property do you have? Some. Not relevant. He waved it off. Point is, you need somewhere to land. I'm offering a landing spot. Why? Back to that again? It's a valid question. Caleb was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, less casual, more deliberate. I came here 10 years ago with nothing. Someone gave me a chance I didn't deserve. Figured I'd pay it forward. I'm not charity. Didn't say you were. This is business. You're skilled. Town needs a seamstress. Makes sense. Makes sense, Claire repeated flatly. Yes. You expect me to believe you're doing this out of pure altruism. I expect you to believe I'm making a business proposition that benefits both of us. What you choose to think about my motivations is your business. Clara stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the ranch yard. Ashes was visible near the barn, looking content. The wagon sat ready to roll. She could leave right now, take the $70 and keep drifting until she found... What? Another town that didn't need quilts? Another road that led nowhere? What's the catch? She asked without turning around. No catch. There's always a catch. Then consider this the exception. Clara turned to face him. If I say yes, and I'm not saying I am, what exactly would I be agreeing to? Rent the shop. Set up your business. I'll front the first 3 months. After that, you pay standard rate. If it doesn't work out, you leave. No strings, no obligations beyond the lease. And if I can't make it work? Then you tried. That's more than most people do. She studied his face, looking for the angle she was missing. But Caleb Rourke just looked back at her with those steady eyes, waiting. I need to think about it, Claire finally said. Fair enough? He stood up. Take your time. Offer stands whether you decide today or next week. Why are you like this? Like what? Infuriatingly decent. Caleb smiled, that small expression that transformed his whole face. Just lucky, I guess. Well, Clara spent the rest of the day avoiding a decision by staying busy. She cleaned the bunkhouse that was already clean. She checked the wagon that had already been repaired. She walked Ashes around the property until the horse gave her a look that clearly communicated, we both know what you're doing and it's not subtle. The problem was that Caleb's offer made sense. Too much sense. Which meant there had to be something wrong with it that she wasn't seeing. People didn't just hand you opportunities. They handed you obligations disguised as opportunities. But what was Caleb's obligation? What did he actually want? She was still wrestling with the question when he found her near the barn as the sun started setting. Thought you might want to see the shop before you decide, he said. Clara wanted to say no. Seeing the shop would make it real, and real was dangerous. Real meant hope, and hope had been beating the hell out of her for 2 months straight. But she heard herself say, okay. They rode into town in Caleb's wagon, actual springs, smooth wheels, a horse that didn't look like it was contemplating retirement. Clara tried not to notice the difference between his equipment and hers. Tried and failed. The town looked slightly less depressing in the evening light, or maybe she was just less desperate than she'd been yesterday. Hard to tell. Caleb pulled up in front of a narrow building sandwiched between the general store and what looked like a barber shop. The windows were dusty but intact. The door hung straight. This is it, he said. They went inside. The space was bigger than it looked from outside. One large room with good light from the windows, a smaller back room that could serve as storage or workspace, a wood stove that appeared functional. The floors were dusty but solid. The walls needed paint but had good bones. Clara walked through slowly, seeing potential despite herself. A work table there, fabric storage there, a display area near the windows. She could make this work. She could actually make this work. Which terrified her. "What do you think?" Caleb asked. "I think it's too good to be true." "Or it's just good." Clara turned to face him. "Why me? You don't know me. I could be terrible at business. I could take your charity and disappear tomorrow." "Could you?" "No," she admitted. "But you don't know that." "Don't I?" He leaned against the wall. "You showed up with 7 quilts and asked $40 for work worth twice that. You thanked me for food like it was a gift instead of basic decency. You've been sleeping in a bunkhouse for 2 days and haven't stolen a single thing. You've been checking? Don't need to, I can tell." "That's not an answer." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "My father was a drunk who gambled away everything we had. I watched my mother work herself to death trying to cover his debts. When she died, I was 16 and alone and had exactly $7 to my name." He met her eyes. "Someone gave me a job when they didn't have to. Let me sleep in their barn, fed me until I could feed myself. I wouldn't be here without that. So this is guilt. This is gratitude. There's a difference." Clara wanted to argue, but something in his voice stopped her. This wasn't a negotiation, it was just truth. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Trust that this won't fall apart. Everything else has. Everything else isn't this. You can't promise that." "No," Caleb agreed, "but I can promise I'm not setting you up to fail." Clara looked around the shop again, saw the potential, saw the risk, saw the terrifying possibility of something that might actually work. 3 months free, then standard rate, she said. "That's the offer. And if I can't make it work after 3 months? Then we reassess. But Clara..." He waited until she looked at him. "You can make this work. Question is whether you're going to let yourself try." It was the first time he'd used her given name. She noticed. "I need 1 more night to think about it." "Take 2 if you need them." They rode back to the ranch in silence. Clara watched the landscape change as the sun set, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. It was pretty. She hadn't let herself notice pretty in a long time. When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped her down from the wagon. Unnecessary, but appreciated. Their hands touched briefly, and Clara felt something shift, some small recognition that this moment mattered in ways she didn't fully understand yet. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me the shop." "You're welcome." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think you'd be good for this town. They need someone who doesn't just see them as a market to exploit." "I might fail anyway." "Might. But you might not." Clara nodded and headed for the bunkhouse. At the door, she turned back. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Why did you really buy those quilts?" He smiled. "Because they were beautiful, and you needed someone to see that." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months. Clara slept better that night than she had in years. Morning arrived with a clarity Clara hadn't expected. She woke knowing her decision, which was either wisdom or just exhaustion, giving up the fight. She found Caleb near the barn, working on something mechanical that involved tools she couldn't name. "I'll take the shop," she said without preamble. He looked up, grease on his hands and satisfaction in his eyes. "Yeah?" "Yeah, 3 months to prove it works. After that, we negotiate like adults." "Sounds reasonable. And I'm paying you back for the wagon repair, the food, all of it." "Not necessary." "It is to me." Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but let's call it even trade. You fix anything of mine that needs sewing, we're square." It was a compromise she could accept. "Deal." "Good." He wiped his hands on a rag. "Want to go into town and make it official? Now?" "No time like present." They took both wagons. Claire's because she needed to move her things. Caleb's because it didn't sound like it was slowly dying. The town looked different today. Less desperate, more possible. The shop owner, an older man named Herbert, who apparently owned half the buildings in town, had the paperwork ready. Clara signed her name to a lease that was more generous than anything she'd hoped for. And just like that, she had a business. Or at least the space for one. "You'll need supplies," Caleb said as they left Herbert's office. "Thread, needles, fabric for display. The general store's got some, but you might need to order from suppliers in the next county. I'll make a list. Good. And you'll need somewhere to live that's not my bunkhouse. Clara had been avoiding thinking about that. I'll figure something out. There's a room above the shop. Needs work, but it's livable. Herbert'll rent it cheap. How cheap? $10 a month. It was absurdly low, which meant Caleb had probably negotiated it or was subsidizing it himself. Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Pick your battles. This wasn't the hill to die on. Fine, I'll take it. Smart choice. They spent the rest of the day making the shop functional. Caleb brought tools and lumber. Clara cleaned and organized. The two ranch hands appeared with a work table that turned out to be Caleb's contribution, had it in storage, not using it, and helped set it up. By evening, the shop looked like a shop, rough still, but recognizable. Clara stood in the doorway looking at what they'd accomplished in one day. Something tight in her chest loosened slightly. It's really happening, she said. Caleb, who was securing the last of the window shutters, glanced over. Seems like it. I might actually pull this off. I'd bet on it. Clara turned to look at him. Why? Why what? Why would you bet on me? You barely know me. Caleb climbed down from the ladder and walked over to stand beside her. I know you drove a broken wagon across 2 territories rather than give up. I know you undervalued your own work to survive, but never once begged. I know you're smart enough to be scared, but brave enough to try anyway. He met her eyes. That's enough to know. Something in Clara's chest did a complicated thing that might have been emotion or might have been hunger. Hard to tell. Thank you, she said quietly. You've thanked me about 40 times in 2 days, starting to think you don't know any other words. I know plenty of words. Most of them aren't appropriate for polite company. That got a laugh. A real one, not just the almost smile. The sound made Clara's traitorous heart do another complicated thing. Come on, Caleb said. Let's get you moved into the upstairs before it gets dark. The room above the shop was small but functional. One window, a bed frame that needed a mattress, a stove that looked operational. Clara had lived in worse. She'd lived in much worse. I can bring a mattress from the ranch tomorrow, Caleb offered. I have blankets. I can make do. Clara. She looked at him. Let me help. It was said simply, without agenda. Just an offer. Okay, Clara heard herself say. Thank you. There she goes again. Shut up. Caleb grinned and headed for the door. I'll bring supplies tomorrow. You just focus on not running away overnight. I'm not going to run. Good. Because this town's going to love you, and I'd hate to have to hunt you down and drag you back. He was gone before Clara could respond to that. She stood alone in her new room, in her new building, in her new life that had materialized in less than 48 hours. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and she had no idea if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But for the first time in months, she was actually curious about tomorrow. That had to count for something. The first customer walked in 3 days after Clara opened the shop, and she nearly fumbled the entire interaction. The woman was maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back tight and the kind of face that suggested she didn't suffer fools. She stood in the doorway like she was evaluating whether the place met minimum standards. You the new seamstress? Clara's hands were shaking. She hid them behind her back. Yes, ma'am. Clara Whitmore. Margaret Hayes, I need a dress taken in. Lost weight I wasn't trying to lose. She said it like an accusation against her own body. I can do that. Do you have the dress with you? Margaret produced a bundle wrapped in brown paper. The dress inside was nice quality. Church clothes, probably. Clara examined the seams, calculating what needed doing. I can take it in at the waist and bust. Have it ready in 3 days. How much? This was the part Clara had been dreading. She'd spent 2 nights trying to figure out fair pricing and kept second-guessing herself. Too high and she'd scare people off. Too low and she'd never make rent. $2. Margaret's eyebrows went up. That's all? Clara's stomach dropped. She'd priced too low. Again. But Margaret was already pulling out coins. That's more than fair. Most places would charge $3. I'll take it. The transaction took less than 5 minutes. But when Margaret left, Clara had to sit down. Her first real customer. Her first real job in her own shop. It was such a small thing, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She was still sitting there when Caleb walked in carrying lumber. Saw Margaret leaving. She hire you? Dress alteration, 3 days. Good. He set the lumber down. Thought you could use shelves for fabric storage. Clara had mentioned needing shelves exactly once, 2 days ago, in passing. The fact that he'd remembered and showed up with materials made something warm and uncomfortable settle in her chest. You don't have to build me shelves. I know, I'm doing it anyway. He was already measuring the wall. You should eat lunch. I ate. When? Clara tried to remember. Yesterday? Caleb gave her a look that managed to be both exasperated and amused. That's not how daily meals work. I've been busy. You've been nervous. He said it without judgment. Come on. There's a place down the street that makes decent sandwiches. My treat. I can pay for my own food. I know you can, but I'm offering anyway. They'd had this conversation in various forms about a dozen times since she'd moved into the shop. Clara was starting to recognize it as a kind of dance they did, her resisting help, him offering it anyway, both of them knowing she'd eventually accept. Fine, but I'm paying next time. Deal. The sandwich shop was run by a woman named Ruth who looked at Clara with open curiosity and Caleb with something that might have been knowing amusement. This the girl who took the old Miller place? This is Clara Whitmore, Caleb said. She's opening a seamstress shop. About time this town got one. My husband's been wearing pants with patches on the patches. Ruth slid sandwiches across the counter. You any good? Clara bristled slightly. I am. Don't get defensive. It's a fair question. But Ruth smiled when she said it. Bring me something you've made. I'll be the judge. It was a challenge, but a friendly one. Clara found herself nodding. I will. They ate at a small table near the window. The sandwich was better than decent. Actual meat, fresh bread, vegetables that hadn't given up on life. Clara tried not to inhale it. Town seems nice, she said between bites. It's fine. Small, but folks are decent mostly. Caleb paused. They'll be curious about you. I noticed. Margaret looked at me like I was something she found in her garden. Margaret looks at everyone like that. Don't take it personal. He took a drink of coffee. But yeah, new people get attention, especially young women who show up alone. Clara heard the warning under the words. People are going to talk. People always talk. Question is whether you care. Do you? Caleb shrugged. Not particularly, but I've been here long enough that they're used to me. You're fresh territory. What are they saying? About you? Probably wondering where you came from, why you're here, and what your relationship with me is. Clara felt her face heat. We don't have a relationship. I know that. You know that. But I bought your quilts, gave you a place to stay, helped you set up shop. He said it matter-of-factly. In a town this size, that's basically a marriage proposal. That's ridiculous. That's small towns. Clara set her sandwich down. Does it bother you that they're talking? No? Does it bother you? I don't know yet. She met his eyes. Should it? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Only if you let it. People are going to make assumptions regardless. You can either waste energy fighting their assumptions or just live your life. That's easier said than done. Most worthwhile things are. They finished eating and walked back to the shop. Caleb spent the afternoon building shelves while Clara worked on Margaret's dress. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt comfortable, productive. It was almost closing time when the door opened again. This time it was a man, younger, maybe Clara's age, with the kind of clean hands that meant he didn't do manual labor. He looked around the shop with an expression that suggested he was mentally calculating its worth. Help you? Clara asked. Just looking. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Heard there was a new business in town. Thought I'd introduce myself. James Hartley. The name meant nothing to Clara, but she saw Caleb's posture shift slightly. Not quite tense, but alert. Clara Whitmore. Pleasure. James walked around the shop, touching things without asking. Nice setup you've got here. Must have cost a bit to get started. I manage. I'm sure you do. His eyes landed on Caleb. Rourke, didn't expect to see you playing carpenter. Didn't expect to see you in a seamstress shop, Caleb replied evenly. The air in the room changed, acquiring an edge Clara couldn't quite identify. James smiled again, that same cold expression. Just being neighborly, supporting new businesses and all. He turned back to Clara. If you ever need anything, supplies, connections, financial backing, you let me know. I'm always happy to help a pretty girl get established. Clara's spine stiffened. I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine. For now. But business is unpredictable. Good to know who your friends are. He left before Clara could respond. The shop felt colder somehow. Who was that? She asked. Caleb's jaw was tight. James Hartley. He owns the saloon and a few other properties, thinks he owns the whole town. I take it you two aren't friends. We're not. Caleb set down his tools. He makes loans to people who can't get them elsewhere, charges interest rates that should be illegal. When they can't pay, he takes their property. Clara's stomach turned. Like what happened to my father. Similar. Different players, same game. Caleb looked at her seriously. Stay away from him, Clara. If business gets tight, come to me. Don't go to James. I wasn't planning to go to anyone. Good. But I mean it. That man's a snake. Clara nodded, filing the information away. She'd dealt with men like James before, the kind who smiled while calculating how to use you. After Caleb left, she locked up the shop and climbed the stairs to her room. The mattress he'd brought was softer than anything she'd slept on in months. The stove worked perfectly. She had food in the cupboard and money in her pocket. But she couldn't shake the feeling that James Hartley's visit had been some kind of test. She just wasn't sure if she'd passed. The next few weeks developed a rhythm. Clara worked from dawn until her eyes blurred, taking in every alteration job she could get. Word spread slowly but steadily. The new seamstress was good, fast, and charged fair prices. Women started coming not just from town, but from neighboring farms. Caleb showed up most afternoons with some new improvement he'd decided the shop needed. Better lighting, a proper lock on the back door, a bell for the front entrance. Claire had stopped arguing about it, mostly because arguing with Caleb Rourke was like arguing with weather, pointless and exhausting. You know I'm going to pay you back for all this, she said one afternoon while he installed the bell. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it. Then consider my shelves mended, my shirts hemmed, and my curtains fixed as payment in full. That's not nearly enough. Caleb climbed down from the ladder and looked at her. Clara, you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to quantify every kindness. Sometimes people just help because they can. In my experience, yeah, I know. In your experience, people always want something. He said it gently. But maybe your experience has been limited to the wrong kind of people. Clara wanted to argue, but she was tired, and he had a point she didn't want to concede. Fine, but when I make a profit, I'm buying you dinner. I'll hold you to that. The shop was starting to feel like hers. She'd arranged the workspace exactly how she wanted it. Her mother's sewing box sat on the main table, the tools inside worn smooth from years of use. She'd hung one of the quilts Caleb had bought in the window as advertisement, and people stopped to look at it daily. She was measuring fabric one afternoon when Margaret Hayes came back, this time with 3 friends in tow. Ladies, Margaret announced, this is Clara Whitmore. She did my church dress. Tell them how much you charged, girl. Clara blinked. $2 for the alterations. The women exchanged looks that suggested this was significant information. Louise here needs her wedding dress adjusted, Margaret continued. Her daughter's getting married and wants to wear it. Can you do that? Wedding dresses were delicate work. Lots of details, lots of ways to mess up. But Clara had been sewing since she was 6 years old, and her mother had taught her well. I can do it. Would need to see the dress first to give you a proper estimate. Louise, a slight woman with nervous hands, nodded quickly. I'll bring it tomorrow. How much do you think? Clara considered. Depends on what needs doing, but probably between $5 and $8. Martha in the next county charges $15. I'm not Martha. The women smiled at that. They left with promises to spread the word, and Clara realized something had just shifted. Margaret Hayes had just given her an endorsement, and in a town this small, that mattered. She was still processing this when Caleb arrived with what looked like a wooden sign. What's that? Sign for your shop. Can't have a business without a sign. He showed her, clean lettering on good wood. Whitmore's Fine Sewing. Clara stared at it. When did you make this? Last few evenings. Figured you'd argue if I asked first, so I just made it. I would have argued. Exactly. He was already heading outside to hang it. Clara followed, watching as he mounted it above the door. It looked professional, real, like an actual business instead of a desperate gamble. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." Caleb stepped back to admire his work. "Looks good." "It does." They stood there for a moment looking at the sign. Clara felt something strange happening in her chest, something that might have been hope or might have been terror, possibly both. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Why are you really doing all this?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You want the truth?" "Always. Because when I showed up here 10 years ago, I was half feral and completely broke. A man named Samuel Chen gave me work when he didn't have to. Let me sleep in his barn. Taught me how to run a ranch properly." Caleb's voice went quiet. "He died 5 years ago. Never got to pay him back. So I pay it forward instead." Clara swallowed hard. "I'm not your redemption project. Never said you were, but maybe we both benefit from the arrangement. You get help setting up. I get to feel like I'm worth something beyond cattle and fence posts." It was the most honest he'd been, and it hit Clara harder than she expected. "You're worth more than that." "So are you. That's the point." A woman walking past called out, "Nice sign!" And the moment broke. Caleb headed back inside to clean up his tools, and Clara stood on the street looking at her name above a door. Whitmore's Fine Sewing. She'd built something. Not much yet, but something. It felt fragile and terrifying and absolutely real. That evening, Clara was closing up when she heard shouting from the saloon down the street. Not unusual. The saloon was where men went to make bad decisions public, but something about the tone made her pause. The door banged open and a man stumbled out, followed by James Hartley's voice. "You've got until Friday, Matthews. After that, I take the farm." The man, Matthews, looked destroyed. He staggered down the street without responding. Clara watched from her doorway, anger burning in her chest. This was exactly what had happened to her father. Different town, different players, same ending. She was still standing there when Caleb rode up. "You okay?" Clara gestured toward the saloon. "How does he get away with it?" "With what?" "Destroying people, taking their land, being—" She struggled for words. "Being a parasite." Caleb dismounted, his expression dark. "Because he's smart enough to stay barely legal. The loans are predatory, but they're technically legitimate. And when people default, he has paperwork that says he's entitled to take their property. It's not right." "No, but it's legal." Clara turned to face him. "Your friend Samuel, the man who helped you, did he ever deal with people like James?" "Once. James tried to buy his land. Samuel told him where to stick his offer." Caleb smiled slightly at the memory. "James doesn't forget insults. He's been trying to undermine my operation ever since I inherited the ranch." "How?" "Small things. Spreading rumors I'm overextended, trying to poach my ranch hands with better wages. Once he tried to buy the water rights to my property." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's patient, plays long games." Clara thought about James's visit to her shop, the way he'd offered help while his eyes calculated worth. "He's going to come after me too, isn't he?" "Probably. You're new, vulnerable, and associated with me. That makes you interesting to him." "What should I do?" "Exactly what you're doing. Build your business, keep your finances clean, and don't owe him anything." Caleb put a hand on her shoulder, brief but solid. "And if he tries anything, you tell me." The touch shouldn't have meant anything. It was barely contact, but Clara felt it like a brand. "I can handle myself." "I know you can, but you don't have to handle everything alone." It was becoming a theme with them, Caleb insisting she didn't have to be self-sufficient to the point of self-destruction, Clara resisting because accepting help still felt like weakness. "I should get inside," she said, stepping back from his hand. "Yeah, get some rest." Caleb mounted his horse. "I'll see you tomorrow." "You don't have to come by every day." "I know." He rode off before she could figure out if that was a promise or a threat. Upstairs, Clara lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The room still felt temporary somehow, like she was waiting for someone to tell her the arrangement was over and she had to leave. But weeks had passed and she was still here, making money, building clientele, establishing herself. It was working. That terrified her more than failure would have. The wedding dress arrived the next morning. Louise brought it wrapped in tissue paper, handling it like it might disintegrate. "It was my mother's," she explained. "Then mine. Now Sarah wants to wear it." Clara unwrapped the dress carefully. The fabric was old but well preserved. Delicate lace, tiny pearl buttons, a train that would need serious work. Beautiful craftsmanship from an era when people still took time. It's lovely. Can you really fix it? Clara examined the seams. The waist needed taking in. One sleeve had a tear so small most people wouldn't notice it. The hem was uneven from years of storage. I can fix it, but I need to be honest. This is delicate work. Old fabric, intricate details. It'll take time. How much time? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Louise bit her lip. The wedding's in a month. Then I'll have it ready in 2 weeks. The relief on Louise's face was profound. How much? Clara did the math. Hours of work, delicate materials, the pressure of working on something irreplaceable. She should charge at least $12. $8. I can pay 10. 8 is fair. Louise looked at her like she'd just performed a miracle. Thank you, really. Martha wanted 15 and said she couldn't promise anything. After Louise left, Clara spread the dress across her work table. This was the kind of job that could make or break a reputation. Do it well, and every woman in the county would hear about it. Mess it up, and she'd be done. No pressure. She was studying the lace pattern when the door opened. This time it was Ruth from the sandwich shop carrying a bundle. You said to bring you something to judge. Here. She set down the bundle, a shirt with a torn shoulder seam. Clara picked it up. Simple repair, maybe 20 minutes of work. When do you need it? That's not why I brought it. Ruth crossed her arms. Fix it right now. Show me what you can do. It was a test. Clara recognized it immediately. She threaded her needle and got to work. The seam had torn at stress points, which meant it would tear again if she just stitched it back the same way. She reinforced the area, strengthened the attachment points, then stitched it so the repair was nearly invisible. 10 minutes later, she handed it back. Ruth examined the work closely, then held it up to the light. Huh. Problem? No problem. It's good work. Ruth looked at her appraisingly. Better than good. You learned from your mother. Yes, ma'am. She teach you well. Ruth pulled out coins. What do I owe you? Nothing. You were testing me, not hiring me. I'm hiring you now. What's the price? Clara hesitated. 50 cents? Ruth handed her $1. That's for the repair and for not trying to overcharge me. I like honest people. She headed for the door, then paused. My husband's got 3 more shirts that need work. I'll bring them tomorrow. After she left, Clara stared at the dollar coin. Another customer. Another test passed. She was beginning to think she might actually survive this. The afternoon brought more work. A woman needed curtains hemmed. Another wanted a coat resized for her growing son. Clara took each job, quoted fair prices, and added them to her growing list. She was so focused on work that she didn't notice the time until Caleb walked in carrying a basket. Dinner, he announced. I'm busy. You're always busy. Eat anyway. The basket contained fried chicken, biscuits, and something that looked like pie. Real food, professionally made. Where did this come from? Ruth. She said you fixed her husband's shirt and didn't overcharge her. This is her version of approval. Clara stared at the basket. She didn't have to do this. That's how it works here. You do right by people, they do right by you. Caleb set plates on her work table. Come on, take a break. They ate surrounded by fabric and thread. Caleb told her about a fence that needed mending. Clara told him about the wedding dress. Normal conversation about normal things, except nothing about this felt entirely normal. You're staring, Caleb said without looking up from his chicken. No, I'm not. You are. Clara felt her face heat. I'm just trying to figure you out. What's to figure out? You show up every day, you bring food, you fix things, you act like we're... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Like we're what? I don't know. Friends? Caleb looked at her then, really looked. Would that be so terrible? No, but it's confusing. Why? Because I don't understand what you want from this. He set down his fork. What if I don't want anything except to watch you succeed? Nobody's that selfless. Maybe I'm selfish then. Maybe I like having someone to bring dinner to. Maybe it's nice having a reason to come into town besides buying supplies. His voice stayed level. Maybe I just like your company. Clara's heart did something complicated. Oh. Yeah. Oh. They finished eating in silence that felt charged somehow. When Caleb left, he didn't say when he'd be back. He just looked at her for a long moment and then walked out. Clara cleaned up the dishes and tried to focus on work, but her hands weren't steady. She was beginning to suspect that Caleb Rourke might be more than just a helpful neighbor, and she had absolutely no idea what to do about that. The wedding dress took every bit of skill Clara possessed, and then demanded more. She worked on it in the early mornings before the shop opened, her fingers moving carefully over fabric that was older than she was. The lace required patience she didn't naturally have. The pearl buttons needed individual attention. The train had to be restructured without losing its original shape. 2 weeks turned into 10 days of obsessive focus. Clara barely slept, surviving on coffee and the occasional meal Caleb insisted on bringing by. He'd stopped asking if she needed help and just started showing up with food, setting it down where she'd eventually notice it. "You're going to make yourself sick," he said one evening, watching her squint at stitches in the dimming light. "I'm fine." "You're exhausted." "I said I'm fine." Caleb didn't argue. He just lit the lamps, adjusted them for better light, and sat in the corner reading a newspaper while she worked. His presence had become so regular that the shop felt wrong when he wasn't there. Clara tried not to think about what that meant. The dress was finished on day 12. Clara held it up in the morning light, examining every seam, every stitch, every carefully restored detail. It was perfect. Better than perfect. It looked like it had been made yesterday instead of 40 years ago. Louise cried when she saw it. "Oh, my stars," she whispered, touching the fabric like it might disappear. "It's beautiful. It's better than I remembered." "The fabric held up well. Your mother took good care of it." "She did." Louise wiped her eyes. "Sarah's going to love this." "Thank you, Clara. Really." She paid the $8 and added 2 more without being asked. Clara tried to refuse the extra, but Louise was already out the door, calling back that it was a tip, and tips weren't negotiable. $10. For 2 weeks of work, it probably wasn't enough, but it felt like a fortune. Word about the dress spread faster than Clara expected. By afternoon, 3 more women had stopped by asking about alterations for special occasions. One wanted her daughter's confirmation dress updated. Another needed a christening gown repaired. The third just wanted to see the woman who'd made Louise Matthews cry happy tears. Clara took all 3 jobs, quoted prices that made her nervous, and watched the women agree without hesitation. She was building something real. The thought kept hitting her at odd moments, usually when she was elbow-deep in fabric or calculating supplies. This wasn't temporary anymore. This was actual business. That evening, Caleb showed up earlier than usual. "Heard about the dress?" he said. "News travels fast." "Louise showed it to half the town. You're officially the miracle worker." He set down a bottle. "Thought we should celebrate." Clara eyed the bottle. "Is that whiskey?" "It is." "I don't drink." "Neither do I usually, but this seems like an occasion." He found 2 cups, poured modest amounts. 2 successful businesses and restored wedding dresses. Clara took the cup, sniffed it, made a face. "This smells terrible." "It tastes worse. Drink it anyway." She did. It burned going down and tasted like regret, but there was something ceremonial about it. They were marking a moment, making it official. "I think I might actually make this work," Clara said, staring into her cup. "I know you will." "You can't know that." "Sure I can. You're stubborn enough to outlast any problem." Caleb took another drink, winced. "That's a compliment, by the way." "Didn't sound like one." "That's because you hear stubborn as an insult. It's not. It means you don't give up when things get hard." Clara turned to look at him. The evening light coming through the window turned everything gold, and Caleb looked different somehow, less like the helpful neighbor and more like something she didn't have words for yet. "Why do you believe in me so much?" The question came out before she could stop it. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Because when you showed up here, you were running on fumes and still trying to sell quilts for less than they were worth. Most people would have just given up. You didn't." "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has choices. You chose to keep trying." He set his cup down. "That's worth believing in." Something shifted in the air between them. Clara felt it like a physical thing, pulling tight. "Caleb, I should go." He stood up quickly, too quickly. "Early morning tomorrow. Fence won't mend itself." He was out the door before Clara could figure out what to say. She sat alone in the shop, the whiskey burning in her stomach and confusion burning everywhere else. Something had almost happened. She wasn't sure what, but the almost felt significant. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Clara lay in bed listening to the town settle into quiet, replaying the conversation, trying to understand what Caleb had actually been saying underneath the words about stubbornness and choices. She was still turning it over when morning came. The next few days passed in a blur of work. Clara had more jobs than she could handle comfortably, which meant she was working from dawn until her eyes wouldn't focus anymore. The money was good. The exhaustion was real. Caleb didn't stop by. Clara told herself she didn't notice. She was too busy to notice. The fact that she kept glancing at the door around the time he usually showed up meant nothing. On the fourth day, Margaret Hayes came in with a knowing look that made Clara immediately suspicious. "Haven't seen Caleb Rourke around lately. He's been busy with ranch work." "Mm-hmm." Margaret didn't sound convinced. "You two have a falling out?" "We didn't have anything to fall out from." "Sure you didn't." Margaret set down a bundle. "I need these pants hemmed. My husband thinks he's still the size he was at 20. Reality says otherwise." Clara took the pants, grateful for the change of subject. "I can have these ready in 3 days." "Take 4. I'm not in a rush." Margaret paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Caleb's a good man. One of the few around here who means what he says." "I know that." "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone trying real hard not to know it." She left before Clara could respond. The observation stuck with Clara all day, poking at something she didn't want to examine too closely. Was she avoiding knowing something? And if so, what exactly was she avoiding? That evening, she closed up shop and did something impulsive. She saddled Ashes, who gave her a look that clearly communicated betrayal at being asked to work, and rode out to Caleb's ranch. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in shades of orange and red. The ranch looked peaceful, productive, well-maintained. Caleb was near the barn, working on something mechanical. He looked up when he heard the horse, surprise crossing his face. "Clara, we need to talk." "About what?" "About why you've been avoiding me." Caleb set down his tools, wiped his hands on a rag. "I haven't been avoiding you. You've been coming by every day for weeks, then suddenly nothing. That's avoiding." "I've been busy." "So have I. I'm still here." He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. "You want the truth?" "Always." "I needed some distance to figure out if I was being helpful or just making excuses to see you." Clara's heart did that complicated thing again. "And what did you figure out?" "That I'm probably doing both." Caleb leaned against the fence. "Which complicates things." "How?" "Because you came here needing help, and I gave it. But somewhere along the way it stopped being about help and started being about—" He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind." "About what?" "Clara, don't." "Don't what?" "Don't ask questions? Don't want answers?" She climbed down from Ashes, frustration building. "You've been cryptic for weeks. Showing up, helping, saying things that sound like they mean something and then backing off before I can figure out what. Maybe I'm trying not to pressure you. Or maybe you're scared." That hit something. Clara saw it in the way Caleb's expression closed off. "Scared of what?" "The same thing I am. That this—" She gestured between them. "Whatever this is, it matters. And if it matters, it can hurt." Caleb pushed off the fence, took a step closer. "You think I don't know that? I watched my mother love a man who destroyed her. I swore I'd never put someone in that position. But then you show up with your 7 quilts and your pride and your absolute refusal to stay defeated. And I—" He stopped again. The sunset light caught his face, highlighting the tension there. "You what?" Clara asked quietly. "I don't want to be another thing you have to worry about." "What if I want to worry about you?" The words came out before Clara could think them through. But once they were out, she realized she meant them. Somewhere between the quilts and the shop and the endless small kindnesses, she'd started caring about Caleb Rourke in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude. Caleb stared at her. "Clara, I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I'm just saying I notice when you're not around. I notice when you bring food or fix things or just sit in the corner reading while I work. I notice you, Caleb, and I think you notice me too." "I do." "So what are we doing about it?" He laughed, sharp and surprised. I don't know. I didn't exactly plan for this. Neither did I. Clara took a breath. But I'm tired of pretending it's not happening. Caleb closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He reached out slowly, giving her time to back away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face with hands that were rough from work and gentle in a way that made her chest ache. I'm not good at this, he said. At what? Caring about people. Last time I let myself care about someone who wasn't Samuel, they left. I'm not good at trusting it won't happen again. Clara understood that fear intimately. I'm not good at accepting help without assuming there's a price. I'm not good at staying when things get complicated. She met his eyes. But I'm here anyway. Yeah? Yeah. He kissed her then, and it wasn't smooth or practiced or anything like the romantic notions people wrote about. It was awkward and tentative and real. His beard scratched her face. She wasn't sure where to put her hands. They bumped noses once and had to readjust. But it felt right anyway. When they pulled apart, Caleb was smiling. Actually smiling. Not the small, almost expression, but a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. That was terrible, Clara finished. I was going to say unexpected. It was that too. They stood there grinning at each other like idiots until Ashes made a sound that clearly communicated her opinion about public displays of affection interfering with her dinner schedule. I should get back, Clara said reluctantly. I'll ride with you. Don't like you traveling alone after dark. I can handle myself. I know. I'm being selfish, want to spend more time with you. The honesty of it made Clara's throat tight. Okay. They rode back to town side by side, not talking much but comfortable in the silence. When they reached the shop, Caleb helped her stable Ashes and walked her to her door. So, he said. So, Clara echoed. What happens now? I don't know, I've never done this before. Me neither. Not properly, anyway. Caleb took her hand, threading their fingers together. But I'd like to try, if you're willing. Clara looked at their joined hands, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways she could get hurt, all the reasons she should protect herself and keep distance and not let this matter. Then she thought about Caleb showing up every day with improvements for her shop, about him sitting quietly while she worked, about the way he'd bought her quilts and offered help and never once made her feel small for needing it. I'm willing, she said. Yeah? Yeah. He kissed her again, less awkward this time, and Clara thought that maybe, possibly, she could get used to this. The next morning, Clara woke up feeling different, lighter somehow, like she'd put down weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. She got dressed and opened the shop with actual energy instead of just stubborn determination. The first customer of the day was Ruth, carrying more of her husband's shirts. You look cheerful, Ruth observed suspiciously. I'm just well rested. Uh-huh. This have anything to do with Caleb Rourke riding into town with you last night? Clara felt her face heat. How did you see? Small town girl. 3 people saw you. By now the whole county knows. Ruth set down the shirts. So? You two finally figure out what everyone else has known for weeks? I don't know what you mean. Sure you don't. Just like Caleb doesn't look at you like you hung the moon, and you don't get all flustered when he shows up. Ruth smiled. It's good. You're good together. Don't overthink it. After Ruth left, Clara tried to focus on work, but her mind kept wandering. Was the whole town really talking about them? Did it matter? Should she care? The door opened and Margaret Hayes walked in, followed by 3 other women Clara recognized from church. We need to talk to you, Margaret announced. Clara's stomach dropped. About what? About the fact that you're courting Caleb Rourke and haven't said a word about it. We're not. Oh, please. The whole town saw you riding in together last night, and Caleb's been mooning over you for weeks. Margaret sat down uninvited. We're not here to judge. We're here to give advice. I didn't ask for advice. Nobody ever asks for advice. That's why we give it anyway. One of the other women, Clara thought her name was Helen, leaned forward. Caleb's a good man, but he's been alone for a long time. Be patient with him. And don't let James Hartley get in your head, another woman added. He's going to try to cause problems. That's what he does. Clara felt overwhelmed. I appreciate the concern, but Caleb and I are just, We're figuring things out. It's new. New is when you need advice most, Margaret said firmly. Listen, we've watched Caleb build that ranch from nothing. He works hard, he's honest, and he treats people fair. But he doesn't let many people close. The fact that he's let you in means something. I know that. Do you? Because you've got a look about you like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Whatever happened before you got here, it's not happening now. This town's not perfect, but we take care of our own. And whether you like it or not, you're one of ours now. The words hit Clara harder than expected. One of ours. Like she belonged somewhere for the first time in months. Thank you, she managed. The women left in a flurry of additional advice about cooking and men and how to handle winter storms, leaving Clara standing in her shop feeling like she'd just been adopted by a committee. Caleb showed up that afternoon with lumber for shelves Clara hadn't mentioned needing. Town council pay you a visit? He asked. More like an intervention. How did you know? Margaret stopped by the ranch this morning, wanted to make sure I wasn't trifling with you. Her word, not mine. Clara laughed despite herself. What did you tell her? That my intentions were honorable and she should mind her own business. He set down the lumber. Though in a town this size, nothing's really your own business. I'm learning that. Bothered by it? Clara considered. A week ago, she would have been terrified of the attention, but something had shifted. These people weren't judging her, they were including her, claiming her as part of the community. No, she said, not bothered. Good. Caleb started measuring for the shelves. Because it's only going to get worse. Fair starts next week. Everyone's going to want to know if we're attending together. There's a fair? Annual thing. Livestock competitions, baking contests, dancing. It's actually pretty fun if you don't take the competitions too seriously. And if we attend together, that means we're officially courting in the eyes of the town. Caleb looked at her. But only if you want to be. Clara thought about it. About what it meant to be publicly connected to someone. About how it would feel to have the whole town watching them. About all the ways it could go wrong. Then she thought about Caleb's hands on her face last night. About the way he smiled when he thought she wasn't looking. About how he'd shown up every single day to help without asking for anything back. I want to be, she said. The smile that crossed Caleb's face made her decision feel right. They spent the afternoon working together, Caleb building shelves while Clara organized fabric. It felt domestic in a way that should have scared her but didn't. Instead, it felt comfortable, natural. Can I ask you something? Clara said eventually. Shoot. Why did you really stay away those few days? The truth this time. Caleb paused in his measuring. Because I was falling for you and I wasn't sure if I was allowed to. Allowed to? You came here running from something. I didn't want to be another thing you had to navigate. He set down his tools. And I was scared that if I told you how I felt, you'd leave. Seemed safer to keep distance. That's the opposite of how feelings work. I'm aware. That's why I gave up on distance. He walked over to where she was sorting thread. Clara, I'm not good at this. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to say the wrong thing or push too hard or not push enough. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to. Clara reached up and touched his face, feeling the scratch of his beard under her palm. I'm not good at this either. I'm going to panic and overthink and probably try to run when things get difficult. But I'm choosing to stay. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. He kissed her again, and this time it was less awkward, more certain. Clara leaned into it, letting herself believe that maybe this could actually work. They were still kissing when the door opened. Well. They broke apart to find James Hartley standing in the doorway, smiling that cold smile that never reached his eyes. James, Caleb said flatly, we're closed. Door was open. Thought I'd stop by and check on our new resident. James looked around the shop with an expression that suggested he was calculating its worth. Business seems to be thriving. Congratulations, Miss Whitmore. Thank you. Clara kept her voice neutral. Must be nice having such generous support. His eyes flicked to Caleb. Free rent, free supplies, free labor. Quite the arrangement. Clara felt Caleb tense beside her. The rent's not free, she said. I have a standard lease agreement. Of course you do. I'm sure everything's perfectly legitimate. James took a step into the shop. I just wanted to remind you that my offer still stands. If you ever need actual business backing, the kind that doesn't come with strings attached, you know where to find me. I'm not interested. Not yet, but business is unpredictable. When Rourke here gets tired of playing benefactor, you'll need real support. He smiled at Caleb. No offense. Get out, Caleb said quietly. I'm just being neighborly. You're being a snake. There's a difference. Now get out before I help you out. James held up his hands in mock surrender. No need for threats. I was just leaving. He paused at the door. Enjoy the fair next week, you two. I'm sure it'll be quite the spectacle. He left, and the shop felt colder. Don't listen to him, Caleb said immediately. I'm not. But Clara's hands were shaking. He's going to cause problems, isn't he? He's going to try. That's what he does. Finds vulnerable people and waits for opportunities to exploit them. I'm not vulnerable. I know that. He doesn't. Caleb pulled her close. But he's wrong about one thing. This isn't charity. You're building a legitimate business. The help I've given you is the same help Samuel gave me. It's what people do when they care about each other. Clara nodded against his chest. I know. But a small part of her wondered if James had a point. Was she too dependent on Caleb? Had she built her business on a foundation that could crumble if things between them went wrong? She pushed the thought away. That was fear talking, and she was done letting fear make her decisions. Stay for dinner, she said. You cooking? I was thinking we could go to Ruth's, show the town we're not hiding. Caleb grinned. Look at you, embracing small-town politics. I'm embracing not letting James Hartley think he rattled me. Even better reason. They walked to Ruth's sandwich shop together, hand in hand, and if the whole town noticed, well, that was kind of the point. The fair arrived with the kind of chaotic energy that only small towns could generate. Booths appeared overnight, transforming the empty field at the edge of town into something resembling organized celebration. Livestock pens held animals that had been groomed to within an inch of their lives. Baking tables displayed pies that looked too perfect to eat. Someone had strung lanterns between posts, creating pathways of light for when evening came. Clara stood at the edge of it all, feeling overwhelmed. You okay? Caleb asked, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of cider. It's a lot. It is. But it's also fun once you stop trying to take it all in at once. He handed her a cup. Come on, let me show you around before the judging starts and everyone loses their minds. They walked through the fair together, Caleb greeting people by name, Clara trying to remember faces she'd only seen once or twice in the shop. Everyone stared. Some smiled. A few whispered to their neighbors. Clara felt exposed in a way that made her want to retreat. But Caleb's hand was solid around hers, and she made herself stay. They stopped at the quilting display, where several women had entered their best work. Clara studied each piece with professional interest, noting techniques and patterns. One quilt in particular caught her eye, an intricate star pattern in blues and whites that showed exceptional skill. That's Martha's work, Margaret said, appearing beside them. She enters every year, usually wins too. Clara looked at the blue ribbon already pinned to Martha's quilt. She's very good. She is, but I've seen your mother's quilts. You could give her competition. I'm not entering anything. Why not? Because I just got here. I'm still figuring out how to run a business. I don't need to jump into competitions. Margaret gave her a look that suggested she had opinions about that reasoning. Suit yourself. But next year, I expect to see a Whitmore quilt in this tent. After Margaret left, Caleb squeezed Clara's hand. She's right, you know. You could enter. Not this year. Fair enough. He steered her toward the livestock pens. Come meet my cattle. They're much less judgmental than the quilting ladies. The cattle were, in fact, less judgmental. They were also massive and slightly intimidating. Clara kept a respectful distance while Caleb checked on his entries. A bull that looked like it could pull down a building, and 2 cows that seemed remarkably calm despite the chaos. You raised these? She asked. From calves. Well, the cows anyway. The bull I bought 2 years ago. Caleb scratched behind one cow's ear. Good stock. They'll place well. You sound confident. I am. Samuel taught me how to spot quality. These are quality. A man Clara didn't recognize approached, looking at the cattle with appreciation. Rourke, fine animals. Thanks, Patterson. Heard you've been busy lately. New business venture in town. Patterson's eyes slid to Clara with obvious curiosity. This is Clara Whitmore. She runs the seamstress shop. Clara, this is John Patterson. He owns the spread north of mine. Pleased to meet you, Clara said, shaking his offered hand. Likewise, my wife's been talking about visiting your shop. Says you did wonders with Louise Matthews' wedding dress. It was good fabric to begin with. I just restored it. Modest, too. Caleb, you picked well. The comment made Clara's face heat. Caleb just smiled and changed the subject to cattle breeding, which Clara understood exactly nothing about, but listened to anyway because watching Caleb talk about something he cared about was unexpectedly compelling. They spent the afternoon wandering between exhibits. Caleb introduced her to what felt like half the county. Clara's head spun with names and faces, but people were friendly, welcoming even. Like Margaret had said, she was one of theirs now, whether she'd planned to be or not. As evening approached, someone started playing a fiddle near the dance area. Other instruments joined in, a guitar, a banjo, someone's harmonica. The music was lively and slightly off-key and exactly what the gathering needed. You dance? Caleb asked. Clara laughed. Badly. Perfect. So do I. He pulled her into the growing crowd of dancers. The steps were simple enough that Clara could follow them, though she stepped on Caleb's feet twice, and he nearly knocked into another couple during a turn. But everyone was laughing, including them, and Clara found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since arriving. The music shifted to something slower. Caleb pulled her closer, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers. They swayed more than danced, which suited Clara fine. Thank you for bringing me, she said quietly. Thank you for coming. I almost didn't. I know. You had that look this morning like you were planning an escape route. Clara smiled against his shoulder. You're learning my tells. I'm trying. He was quiet for a moment. Clara? Yeah? I'm glad you stayed. Me too. They danced until the music wound down and people started drifting toward the food tables. Caleb went to check on his cattle one more time, leaving Clara near the quilting tent. She was studying Martha's prize-winning work when a voice made her turn. Impressive, isn't it? James Hartley stood too close, holding a cup of something that probably wasn't cider. Clara took a deliberate step back. It is. Martha's been perfecting her craft for 30 years. Hard to compete with that kind of experience. He smiled. Then again, you're not really here to compete, are you? You're here as Rourke's accessory. I'm here because I wanted to come. Of course, my mistake. James took a sip of his drink. How's business? Still thriving? It's fine. Good, good. I'd hate to see all that free support go to waste. Must be nice having someone cover your expenses while you play at entrepreneurship. Clara's jaw tightened. I'm not playing at anything. I have a legitimate business with legitimate customers. For now, but what happens when Rourke gets bored? When the novelty of his charity project wears off? James leaned closer. You've built everything on his generosity. That's not a foundation. It's quicksand. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? I've seen this pattern before. Man helps pretty girl, girl thinks it's about her. Reality eventually intrudes. He set down his cup. I'm not trying to be cruel, Miss Whitmore. I'm trying to prepare you for the inevitable. The only thing that's inevitable is you trying to manipulate people. Clara met his eyes. Caleb warned me about you. Said you prey on vulnerability. But I'm not vulnerable, and I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. James's smile never wavered. We'll see. Winter's coming. Business slows down, expenses don't. When you're struggling to make rent and Rourke's tired of subsidizing you, remember I offered alternatives. He walked away before Clara could respond. She stood there shaking, anger and doubt warring in her chest. James was wrong. He had to be wrong. But a small voice asked, what if he wasn't? What if she had built everything on borrowed stability? Clara? She turned to find Caleb approaching, concern on his face. What did James say to you? Nothing important. Don't lie, I saw you talking. What did he say? Clara took a breath. He suggested that I'm only succeeding because of your charity, that when you get tired of helping, everything will fall apart. Caleb's expression darkened. He's trying to get in your head. That's what he does. I know that, but... Clara stopped, trying to find words. What if he has a point? What if I have been too dependent on your help? You haven't. How do you know? You've paid for repairs, brought supplies, built half my shop infrastructure. Maybe I've just been fooling myself that this is my success. Caleb took her shoulders gently. Look at me. The shop is yours. The business is yours. The customers keep coming back because you're good at what you do, not because I fixed your wagon once. His voice was firm. James wants you to doubt yourself. Don't give him that power. Clara wanted to believe him, but doubt was easier than confidence, and James had found exactly the right pressure point. I need some air, she said, pulling away. Clara, I just need a minute, please. She walked away from the fair, away from the music and lights and people, until she found a quiet spot near the livestock pens. The cattle were settling in for the night, their breathing steady and calm. Clara leaned against the fence, trying to sort through the mess in her head. She'd built a business. That was real. She had customers who came back because they trusted her work. That was real too. But she couldn't deny that Caleb's help had been significant. Without him, would she have made it this far? The question felt important and dangerous. Footsteps approached. Clara expected Caleb but found Margaret instead. Saw you storm off. Figured you could use some perspective. I'm fine. You're not. James got to you. Margaret leaned on the fence beside her. Let me guess. He suggested you're only successful because of Caleb's charity? Clara looked at her sharply. How did you know? Because that's his favorite play. He did the same thing to Samuel Chen years ago. Tried to convince him that his ranch would fail without proper financial backing, meaning James's backing, of course. Margaret snorted. Samuel told him where to stick it. Ranch thrived anyway. But what if he's right about me? What if I have been too dependent? Have you paid your rent the last 2 months? Clara nodded. Have you bought your own supplies? Yes. Do your customers come back because of your work or because of Caleb? My work. Then what exactly are you dependent on? Margaret's voice was matter of fact. Caleb helped you get started. So what? We all get help starting. That's how communities work. The question isn't whether you had help. It's what you did with it. Clara absorbed this. James made it sound like charity. James makes everything sound like something it's not. That's his gift. Margaret straightened. Listen, I've lived in this town for 40 years. I've seen businesses come and go. Yours is growing because you're skilled and honest and you treat people fair. That's got nothing to do with Caleb Rourke and everything to do with Clara Whitmore. You really believe that? I don't say things I don't believe. Waste a breath. Margaret patted her shoulder. Now stop hiding out here and get back to the fair. You've got a good man waiting for you, and the dancing's just getting started. Clara found Caleb near the cattle pens, talking with John Patterson about feed quality. He looked up when she approached, question and concern in his eyes. Can we talk? She asked. Of course. They walked away from the pens, finding relative privacy near a storage shed. The fair's music drifted on the evening air, bright and lively. I'm sorry, Clara said, for running off like that. Don't apologize. James said something that upset you. That's on him, not you. But I let it get to me. I let him make me doubt everything. Clara took his hand. Margaret helped me remember something important. What's that? That getting help isn't the same as being helpless. And that what I've built is real, regardless of how it started. Caleb squeezed her hand. It is real. You're real. He gestured between them. This is real too. James can't change that. I know, but I think... Clara paused, organizing her thoughts. I think I need to prove to myself that I can handle things on my own, not because I don't trust you or don't want your help, but because I need to know I can stand without it. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What does that look like? I don't know yet. Maybe taking on a bigger project, maybe expanding the shop, something that's entirely mine, start to finish. Okay. You're not upset? Why would I be upset? You want to prove you're capable of something you've already proven half a dozen times. That's not threatening. It's you being you. He pulled her close. Just remember that choosing to stand alone sometimes doesn't mean you have to stand alone always. Clara leaned into him, breathing in dust and leather and the particular scent that meant Caleb. I know. They stayed like that for a while, wrapped up in each other while the fair continued around them. Eventually, they walked back toward the music. People had started gathering for the evening's final dance, something traditional that required couples to weave between each other in complicated patterns. "You ready for this?" Caleb asked. "I'm going to step on your feet." "Probably. I'm going to spin you the wrong direction." "Definitely." They joined the dance anyway, fumbling through the steps and laughing when they got it wrong. Clara saw James watching from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. She made a point of not looking away, not showing uncertainty. She was here. She was building something, and she wasn't going anywhere. The night ended with lanterns being lit, turning the fair into something magical. Caleb walked Clara back to the shop, their hands linked, neither wanting to rush the moment. "Thank you for today," Clara said at her door. "Thank you for not letting James win." "He was never going to win. I just needed reminding of that." Caleb smiled, brushed hair from her face. "You're going to be fine, Clara. Better than fine." "I know, but it's nice hearing you say it." He kissed her goodnight, sweet and lingering, and Clara stood in her doorway watching him ride away until he disappeared into darkness. Inside, the shop was quiet. Her shop. Her work. Her choices. She'd come here with 7 quilts and desperation. Now she had a business, a community, and something that felt dangerously close to belonging. James Hartley could scheme all he wanted. Clara wasn't running anymore. The weeks after the fair brought changes, Clara took on a project that terrified her, creating a quilt from scratch for the church's winter auction. Not altering someone else's work, not repairing old fabric, but making something entirely new. It would be her statement, her proof of capability. She worked on it in the early mornings before the shop opened, choosing colors that reminded her of the prairie at sunset, golds and oranges and deep purples. The pattern was complex, something her mother had taught her years ago, but she'd never attempted alone. It was slow work, precise, unforgiving. Caleb stopped by less frequently, respecting Clara's need to prove herself. But he still showed up for dinner most evenings, and they spent those hours talking about everything and nothing. His ranch was doing well. Her customer base was growing. They were building separate lives that somehow fit together. One evening, Caleb brought news. "John Patterson's selling his north pasture. Good land bordered by creek access." "You thinking of buying it?" "I am. Would nearly double my operation." He paused. "But it's a risk, big investment, no guarantee of return." Clara heard the uncertainty in his voice. "What does your gut say?" "My gut says it's a good move, but my head remembers what happened when my father made risky investments." "You're not your father." "I know, but the fear's still there." Clara set down her sewing. "Can I tell you what I see? I see a man who's built a successful ranch through careful planning and hard work, who helps his neighbors without expecting anything back, who took a chance on a desperate woman with 7 quilts and never once made her feel small for needing help." Caleb looked at her. "That man doesn't make reckless decisions," Clara continued. "If you think the land is worth it, it probably is. Trust yourself the way you've been telling me to trust myself." He smiled slowly. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just noticed." Caleb bought the land. The whole transaction took 3 weeks of negotiation and paperwork, but when it was done, his ranch had nearly doubled in size. Clara watched him plan irrigation and fence lines, his excitement barely contained. "You're happy," she observed one evening. "I am. Scared too, but happy." "Good scared or bad scared?" "Good scared. The kind that means something matters." He looked at her. "Kind of like how I feel about you." Clara's heart did its complicated thing again. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." "Really? That's pathetic." "I know, my standards are low. You should take advantage of that." Caleb laughed and pulled her close, and Clara thought that maybe this was what happiness felt like. Not perfect or smooth or uncomplicated, but real and solid and worth the risk. Winter arrived gradually, then all at once. The first snow caught everyone by surprise, too early in the season, too heavy. Clara woke to find the street covered in white, the shop's windows frosted over. Business didn't slow like James had predicted. If anything, it increased. People needed winter clothes repaired, heavy curtains hemmed, blankets mended. Clara worked constantly, her fingers cramping from the cold despite the stove. Caleb showed up one afternoon with supplies. "What's this?" "Warmer fabric. Thought you might need it for winter projects." Clara looked at the quality material, wool and heavy cotton in practical colors. Caleb, this is expensive. Consider it an investment. You make goods, sell them, we both profit. It was a business arrangement that made sense, but Clara hesitated. This felt too much like the kind of help she'd been trying to avoid. What's wrong? Caleb asked. Nothing. Clara struggled to articulate it. I don't want to fall back into depending on you. You're not. This is different. How? Because you're going to pay me back with a percentage of sales. It's actual investment, not charity. He set down the fabric. Clara, there's a difference between accepting smart business opportunities and being dependent. Don't sabotage yourself trying to prove a point. He was right. Clara knew he was right. But the fear of slipping back into reliance was real. 50-50 split, she said finally, on anything I make from this fabric. Deal. They shook on it, formal and businesslike. But Caleb's eyes were warm when he looked at her. The fabric turned into winter goods, warm shawls, heavy blankets, practical scarves. Clara priced them fairly, and they sold faster than she could make them. By month's end, she'd not only paid Caleb back his investment, but made a profit that let her finally feel secure. The quilt for the church auction was nearly finished. Clara worked on the final border with hands that shook slightly. This was it. Her proof that she could create something valuable entirely on her own. The night before the auction, she spread the quilt across her work table and examined it critically. The stitching was precise. The colors worked together. The pattern was complex but coherent. It was good. Maybe even better than good. That's beautiful. Clara turned to find Margaret in the doorway. I knocked. You didn't answer. Door was unlocked, so I let myself in. Margaret walked closer, studying the quilt. This is your work? Yes. Your mother taught you well. She did. Margaret ran her hand over the fabric gently. This is going to fetch a good price tomorrow. Mark my words. The auction was held in the church hall, which had been decorated with winter greenery and candles. Half the town showed up, drawn by the promise of food and the chance to bid on donated goods. Clara's quilt was item number 7. She sat between Caleb and Margaret, trying not to fidget as the auctioneer worked through the earlier items. A pie went for $3. A hand-carved chair brought in 8. Someone's embroidered pillowcases fetched 2. Then came the quilt. The auctioneer held it up, and Clara heard the appreciative murmurs. People leaned forward, examining the work. Fine piece here, folks. Made by our own Clara Whitmore. Let's start the bidding at $5. 5, someone called immediately. 6, another voice. 7. The bidding climbed steadily. Clara's heart pounded as the numbers rose. 8, 9, 10. At $12, most people dropped out. 12 going once. 15, a woman called from the back. Clara turned to see Martha, the woman whose quilt had won at the fair. She was smiling. $15, the auctioneer confirmed. Any advance on 15? Silence. Sold to Martha for $15? The room applauded. Clara sat frozen, trying to process that Martha had just paid $15 for her quilt. Caleb squeezed her hand, pride evident in his expression. After the auction, Martha approached with the quilt folded carefully. I wanted you to know this is excellent work, really excellent. Martha's voice was kind. I bid on it because I recognize the pattern. Your mother's work, I assume? Yes, she taught me. She taught you very well. This is going in my guest room, and when people ask who made it, I'm going to send them straight to your shop. Martha patted Clara's arm. Welcome to the community, dear, properly this time. Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. Thank you. After Martha left, Caleb pulled Clara aside. You did it, he said quietly. Did what? Proved whatever you needed to prove. To yourself and everyone else. Clara looked at him. At the man who'd bought her quilts when she was desperate, who'd given her a place to start, who'd believed in her even when she couldn't believe in herself. I couldn't have done any of this without you, she said. Maybe. But you're the one who did it. I just opened a door. You walked through it. Clara kissed him there in the church hall with half the town watching. She didn't care. Let them see. Let them talk. This man had changed her life, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The winter settled in properly after that, bringing cold that made Clara grateful for good walls and a working stove. Business stayed steady. Caleb's expanded ranch thrived despite the weather. They spent evenings together more often than apart, and slowly, quietly, their separate lives became something more intertwined. Clara didn't fight it anymore, didn't question it, just let it happen. One evening, as they sat by her stove with coffee and comfortable silence, Caleb said something that changed everything again. "I was thinking about next spring." "What about it?" "About planting season. About how much work it'll be with the expanded property." He paused. "About how it would be easier with a partner." Clara set down her coffee. "Are you asking me to help with planting?" "No. I'm asking if you'd consider making the ranch work our work instead of just mine." He met her eyes. "I'm asking if you'd marry me, Clara." The words hung in the air between them, significant and terrifying and exactly right. "That's not a proper proposal," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I know, but I'm not a proper man, and we're not a proper couple, so it fits." "You should at least get down on one knee." "I'm not getting down on one knee. My knee's bad. I'll never get back up." Clara laughed despite the tears starting to form. "You're supposed to have a ring." "I have a ring. Belonged to Samuel's mother. He gave it to me before he died, said to save it for someone who mattered." Caleb pulled out a simple gold band. "You matter, Clara. More than I knew how to plan for." She took the ring, feeling its weight. It was worn smooth from years of use, warm from being carried close to Caleb's body. "I'm still figuring out who I am," she said quietly. "Still learning how to stand on my own." "I know. I'm not asking you to stop figuring things out. I'm asking if you want to figure them out together." Clara looked at him, really looked, saw the man who'd shown up every day with improvements she didn't ask for, who'd defended her to his community, who'd stepped back when she needed space and stepped forward when she needed support. "Yes," she said. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Caleb smiled that smile that transformed his whole face, and Clara slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, which felt like the universe confirming something they'd both already known. They were supposed to be together. It had been true since the moment he'd bought 7 quilts at a price they both knew was too high. The rest would figure itself out. News of the engagement spread through town faster than Clara could have announced it herself. By the time she opened the shop the next morning, 3 women were already waiting outside with congratulations and unsolicited advice about wedding planning. "Small ceremony," Margaret insisted. "Nothing fancy. That's not who you two are." "My niece can make the cake," another woman offered. "She's been practicing." "You'll need a dress. I have my mother's. It might fit with alterations." Clara stood in the doorway of her own shop, overwhelmed by the sudden committee that had formed around her life choices. "Thank you all, but Caleb and I haven't even discussed details yet." "Well, discuss them soon. Spring weddings book up fast, and the church only has so many Saturdays." Margaret looked at her seriously. "You are having it in the church, aren't you?" Yes, I suppose." "Good. I'll talk to Reverend Thompson. He'll want to meet with you both before he agrees to officiate." The women swept into the shop like a benevolent storm, leaving Clara standing there wondering how she'd lost control of her own wedding in less than 12 hours. Caleb showed up at noon, looking amused. "Heard you got ambushed this morning." "How did you hear that?" "Ruth stopped by the ranch, gave me a list of things I apparently need to do before the wedding. It's 3 pages long." Clara laughed despite herself. "We should have eloped. Too late now. The town's invested." He kissed her forehead. "Besides, I don't mind. Let them fuss. Makes them happy." "You're handling this suspiciously well." "That's because I'm not the one they're ambushing. You're the bride. You get all the attention." "Lucky me." They spent lunch discussing actual plans. Not the town's plans, but theirs. Small ceremony, just close friends and family. Spring timing, after the planting was done, but before summer heat made everything miserable. Simple food, probably at the ranch since it had more space than anywhere else. "What about your shop?" Caleb asked. "You keeping it after we're married?" Clara looked at him sharply. "Of course I'm keeping it. Why wouldn't I? Some women don't work after marriage. I wanted to make sure you knew I don't expect that." "Good, because I'm not giving up what I built." "I know, just wanted to be clear." He took her hand. "We're partners, Clara. In everything. Your business is yours. The ranch is mine. Our life is ours. Nothing changes except you get a new last name and I get someone to argue with every day." You already argue with me every day. Now it'll be official. The winter months passed in a blur of wedding planning that Clara mostly tried to avoid. She let Margaret handle the church arrangements, let Ruth organize the food, let the quilting circle decide on decorations. Clara focused on what she could control: her business, her work, her daily life. The shop continued to thrive. Word had spread beyond the immediate town, bringing customers from neighboring counties. Clara hired help for the first time, a young woman named Sarah who needed work and showed promise with basic alterations. It felt strange delegating tasks, but also right. The business was growing beyond what one person could handle alone. Caleb's ranch expanded as planned. The new pasture brought in cattle that turned profit faster than expected. He hired 2 more hands permanently, building them a proper bunkhouse instead of just offering space in the barn. The operation was becoming substantial. They spent evenings planning not just the wedding, but the life that came after, where Clara's shop would fit into ranch life, how Caleb's work schedule would accommodate her business needs, the practical details of combining 2 established lives into something that worked for both. "We're doing this backwards," Clara observed one night. "Most people figure out compatibility before they get engaged. Most people are boring." Caleb stretched out on her small sofa, looking completely at home. "We're interesting. That's one word for it." "You having second thoughts?" Clara considered lying, then didn't. "Sometimes. Not about you, about whether I can actually do this. Marriage, partnership, all of it. I've been on my own so long." "You've been on your own for 8 months. That's not that long." "It feels long." Caleb sat up, pulled her close. "You want the truth? I have second thoughts too. Wonder if I'm enough for you. If I can give you what you need without trying to control everything." "You don't control everything." "I try to. It's a problem I'm working on." Clara leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent. "Maybe we're supposed to have doubts. Maybe that's how we know it matters." "Maybe." They sat like that for a while, comfortable in the uncertainty. This was real life, Clara thought. Not the smooth narratives people told about their courtships, but the messy actual truth of 2 people trying to figure out how to fit together. She wouldn't trade it for anything. James Hartley made his move in late February. Clara was working alone in the shop. Sarah had gone home early. When James walked in with papers, and that smile that never reached his eyes. "Miss Whitmore, or should I say, soon-to-be Mrs. Rourke." "What do you want, James?" "Just bringing some information I thought you'd find interesting." He set papers on her work table. "Regarding your lease agreement." Clara's stomach dropped. "What about it?" "Seems there's a clause that allows the landlord to renegotiate terms under certain circumstances, change in marital status being one of them. Herbert sold me the building last week. Needed capital for a business venture. I was happy to provide it." James's smile widened. "Which makes me your new landlord." Clara felt ice in her veins. "You can't change my lease terms. I have a contract." "You do, for another 2 months, then it's up for renewal." He tapped the papers. "I'm thinking triple the current rate seems fair. It's a prime location, after all." Triple. Clara did the math quickly. That would eat most of her profit. She could still survive, but barely. It would set her back months, maybe longer. "This is retaliation, because of Caleb." "This is business. Real estate values fluctuate. I'm simply adjusting to market conditions." James walked toward the door. "You have 2 months to decide if you can afford to stay. Or you could always close up shop, focus on being a rancher's wife. I'm sure Caleb would support you." He left before Clara could respond. She stood there shaking, rage and fear mixing into something that tasted like bile. This was exactly what James had warned about, using her business as leverage. And she'd walked right into it by succeeding, by becoming established enough to be worth targeting. Caleb arrived an hour later and found her pacing the shop. "What happened?" Clara told him everything, watched his expression darken with each detail. "That bastard! He's been planning this for months." "What do I do?" "You don't pay him. We find another location." "There is no other location. This is the only commercial space available in town." Caleb grabbed his coat. "Then I'll talk to him." "No." Clara caught his arm. "That's what he wants. You confronting him gives him power." "So we just let him win?" "I didn't say that. I said we don't play his game." But Clara didn't know what game to play instead. She spent the night running numbers, looking for solutions that didn't exist. Triple rent was unsustainable. Moving meant losing her established location and customer base. Closing meant James won. There had to be another option. The answer came from an unexpected source. Margaret showed up the next morning with the quilting circle in tow, 6 women who'd apparently heard about the situation and decided to intervene. "We have a proposal," Margaret announced. "For what?" "For dealing with James Hartley's nonsense." Margaret sat down uninvited. "We buy the building from him." Clara blinked. "What?" "The 6 of us pool our money, buy the building, become your landlords instead. We keep your rent the same. James loses his leverage. Everyone wins." "I can't let you do that." "Why not?" "Because it's your money, your savings. I can't ask you to risk that for me." "You didn't ask. We're offering." One of the other women, Helen, leaned forward. "Clara, this town needs your shop. And more importantly, we need to show James that he can't bully people just because he has capital. We're tired of watching him manipulate folks." "But if the business fails..." "Then we have a building we can rent to someone else. It's not charity, girl. It's investment." Margaret pulled out papers. "We've already drawn up the offer. We present it to James tomorrow. He can accept, or we make his life difficult in ways he hasn't considered yet." Clara looked at these women who'd taken her in, taught her the town's rhythms, defended her against gossip. They were offering not just money, but solidarity. "I'll pay you back," she said quietly. "Every cent, with interest." "We know you will. That's why we're investing." Margaret stood up. "Now stop looking like we're doing you a favor. We're doing ourselves a favor. Your shop brings business to this street. We profit when you profit." The women left in the same efficient whirlwind they'd arrived in. Clara sat alone in her shop, trying to process that she'd just been rescued by a quilting circle. Caleb's reaction that evening was similar to hers. "They're buying the building?" "Apparently. That's..." He stopped, shook his head. "That's the most aggressively helpful thing I've ever heard." "Right? I don't know whether to be grateful or terrified." "Be both. That's what I am." Caleb pulled her close. "But mostly be grateful. They just took away James's power play." "He's not going to like it." "No, but there's not much he can do about it. 6 established town women with cash and determination, he'd be smarter to just take their offer and move on." James didn't move on gracefully. He rejected the first offer, countered with an inflated price, and generally made the transaction as difficult as possible. But the quilting circle had apparently anticipated this. They negotiated with the kind of ruthless efficiency that came from decades of community organizing and church committee meetings. 3 weeks later, they owned the building. Clara's rent stayed exactly the same. James's influence over her business ended completely. The victory felt sweet, but Clara knew it came with obligations. She'd have to succeed now, not just for herself, but for the 6 women who'd invested in her. The pressure was different than before, but no less real. "You're overthinking again," Caleb said, watching her pace. "I owe them. You owe them good business practices and fair rent. That's it. They didn't invest in you out of pity. They invested because you're a good risk." "What if I'm not?" Caleb caught her mid-pace, held her still. "You are. And even if something went wrong, they're prepared for that risk. That's what investment means." Clara knew he was right, but the fear of failing people who'd supported her felt crushing. "How do you handle it?" she asked. "The pressure of people depending on you?" "By remembering that they chose to depend on me. They could have chosen differently. The fact that they didn't means they see something I sometimes can't." He kissed her forehead. "Trust their judgment, Clara. They know what they're doing." Spring arrived with the kind of dramatic weather that made everyone question their life choices. Rain for days, then sudden heat, then more rain. The roads turned to mud. Planting got delayed. Everyone's tempers frayed. Clara and Caleb's wedding was scheduled for the second Saturday in May, weather permitting. Given the current weather patterns, permission seemed unlikely. "We could postpone," Caleb suggested after another day of torrential rain. "We're not postponing. Everyone's already planned around this date." "Everyone will understand." "I won't understand. We've been planning this for months. I want to be married to you, not engaged indefinitely." Caleb looked at her with surprise and something that might have been tenderness. "You really mean that?" "Of course I mean that. Why wouldn't I?" "Because marriage scared you 3 months ago. Now you're demanding we stick to schedule despite weather." Clara considered this. He was right. She had been scared. Scared of dependence, scared of losing herself, scared of trusting something good. But somewhere along the way, those fears had become less important than the reality of what she and Caleb had built. "I'm still scared," she admitted, "but I'm more scared of not trying." The day before the wedding, the rain finally stopped. The sun came out, turning everything green and fresh and impossibly bright. It felt like a sign, though Clara tried not to read too much into weather patterns. Margaret and the quilting circle descended on the ranch to help with preparations. Ruth brought enough food to feed the county twice over. Caleb's ranch hands cleaned and organized with military precision. Sarah closed the shop for the day and helped Clara with her dress, a simple creation in cream-colored fabric that Clara had made herself. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, adjusting the hem. "I look nervous." "That too, but mostly beautiful." Clara studied herself in the mirror. The dress was good work, not fancy, but well-made and flattering, the kind of thing her mother would have approved of. She felt her mother's absence like a physical ache. Her father's too, though that hurt was more complicated. They should have been here, should have seen this. "You okay?" Sarah asked gently. "Yeah, just missing people." "That's allowed, even on happy days." The ceremony was small, like they'd planned. Maybe 40 people total, gathered in the church where Clara had first met most of them. Reverend Thompson kept his remarks brief and practical, which suited both Clara and Caleb perfectly. When it came time for vows, Caleb spoke first. "I'm not good with words. Never have been." "But Clara," he took her hands, held them firmly. "You showed up here with nothing and built something anyway. You didn't let defeat keep you down. You didn't let fear stop you from trying. And somehow, for reasons I still don't understand, you decided I was worth your time." People laughed softly. "I can't promise everything will be easy. Ranch life is hard. Business is unpredictable. We're both stubborn enough to make simple things complicated." He smiled. "But I can promise I'll show up. I'll support your dreams even when they scare me, and I'll love you even when you're being impossible." "Your turn," Reverend Thompson said to Clara. Clara took a breath. Public speaking wasn't her strength, but she'd practiced this. "Caleb, when I met you, I didn't trust kindness. I'd learned that help always came with strings, and generosity was usually manipulation." Her voice steadied as she continued. "You proved me wrong about that. Not through words, but through showing up every single day and meaning what you said. You gave me space to be scared and time to be stubborn, and patience when I couldn't see past my own fear." She squeezed his hands. "I can't promise I won't still be scared sometimes, or that I won't overthink everything, or that I'll always accept help gracefully." People laughed again. "But I promise I'll choose you. Every day. Even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Because you're worth choosing." Reverend Thompson pronounced them married, and Caleb kissed her with the kind of certainty that came from actually meaning the vows they'd just spoken. The reception was held at the ranch, sprawling across the yard in organized chaos. Someone had strung lights between the outbuildings. Ruth's food covered 2 full tables. The same fiddle player from the fair provided music, joined by the guitar and banjo players. Clara danced with Caleb, with Margaret, with several ranch hands who insisted it was tradition. She ate too much cake and laughed at toasts that ranged from heartfelt to borderline inappropriate. She watched her new husband talk with neighbors and accept congratulations with the kind of genuine humility that had made her fall for him in the first place. As evening settled in and the party showed no signs of slowing, Caleb pulled Clara aside. "You happy?" "Exhausted, but yeah, happy." "Good." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "Because we're stuck with each other now." Legally binding stuck. The most permanent kind. They stood together watching their friends and neighbors celebrate, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. 7 quilts and a broken wagon, desperation and determination. A man who'd bought overpriced quilts and somehow seen past her defenses. She'd come here with nothing. Now she had everything. The first year of marriage taught Clara that combining lives was harder than ceremonies suggested. She and Caleb argued about everything: whose schedule took priority, how to manage finances, where to store things in the house they now shared. Small conflicts that revealed deeper patterns they both had to navigate. Clara struggled with asking for help when she needed it. Caleb struggled with offering help without taking over. They were both used to running their own operations and suddenly had to coordinate everything. But they figured it out, slowly, awkwardly, through trial and error. The shop continued growing. Clara hired 2 more workers as demand increased. She started taking commissions for custom work, quilts, special occasion dresses, intricate alterations that other seamstresses wouldn't attempt. Her reputation spread beyond the county. Caleb's ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region. The expanded pasture paid off exactly as he'd predicted. He started breeding quality cattle that other ranchers wanted to buy. The business that Samuel had started and Caleb had continued was now thriving beyond what either of them had probably imagined. They were successful, individually and together. But success brought its own challenges. Clara was working too much, trying to keep up with demand while maintaining quality. She came home exhausted most nights, barely able to eat before falling asleep. Caleb was doing the same thing, pushing himself to meet the ranch's growing demands. They were building empires and forgetting to actually live in them. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late fall. Clara had been working 16-hour days for a week straight, trying to finish a custom order for a wealthy client 2 counties over. The money was substantial, but the deadline was brutal. She'd barely seen Caleb except in passing. She came home to find him waiting with dinner and an expression that meant a serious conversation was coming. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" "About the fact that we're married but living like business associates who happen to share a house." Clara sat down heavily. "I know. I'm sorry. This commission is just... It's always something. A big commission, a rush order, a crisis that needs your immediate attention." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "Same with me and the ranch. There's always another fence to mend, another deal to negotiate." "So what do you suggest?" "I suggest we remember why we got married, which wasn't to build separate business empires, and occasionally acknowledge each other exists." Clara felt tears prickling. "I don't know how to slow down. If I slow down, someone else gets the commissions. Someone else becomes the seamstress everyone wants. And then what? You're the most successful seamstress in 3 counties, but too exhausted to enjoy it?" Caleb reached across the table. "Clara, I'm not asking you to give up your work. I'm asking you to find balance before you burn out completely." He was right. Clara knew he was right, but knowing and changing were different things. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of stopping, of resting, of proving that I can't actually handle everything I've built." Caleb came around the table, pulled her into his arms. "You've already proven you can handle it. Now prove you're smart enough to delegate it." That conversation led to changes, real ones. Clara promoted Sarah to manager, giving her authority to handle routine alterations without Clara's direct supervision. She hired another experienced seamstress to take on medium-level custom work. She established actual working hours instead of just working until she collapsed. It was hard. Clara had to fight every instinct that said delegating was failing. Had to remind herself daily that building a sustainable business meant not doing everything personally. But slowly, it worked. She had time to breathe, time to actually talk with Caleb over dinner instead of just falling asleep at the table, time to remember why she'd wanted this life in the first place. Caleb made similar changes. He hired a ranch foreman to handle day-to-day operations, stopped micromanaging every detail, learned to trust that the systems he'd built could run without his constant intervention. They remembered how to be married instead of just business partners who lived together. The second year brought unexpected news. Clara was pregnant. She discovered it in early spring, standing in her shop feeling nauseous for the 3rd day in a row. The realization hit her with equal parts terror and wonder. Telling Caleb that evening was one of the hardest conversations she'd ever navigated. "I'm pregnant." Caleb set down the harness he'd been mending. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I'll confirm with the doctor, but yeah, I'm sure." "How do you feel about it?" Clara appreciated that he asked instead of assuming. Terrified, happy, completely unprepared. All of that at once. "Same here." Caleb stood up, crossed to where she stood. "We can do this." "Can we?" "I just figured out how to run a business without destroying myself. Now we're adding a child. We'll figure it out, same way we figured out everything else." He put his hand on her still flat stomach. Together. Pregnancy was harder than Clara expected. Morning sickness lasted well into the 4th month. Exhaustion made working difficult. Her body changed in ways that made her feel disconnected from herself. But the community rallied. Margaret and the quilting circle brought meals when Clara was too sick to cook. Ruth made sure the shop stayed stocked with ginger tea and bland crackers. Sarah stepped up even more, handling aspects of the business Clara couldn't manage. Caleb was patient in ways Clara hadn't known to hope for. He held her hair when she was sick, rubbed her back when she couldn't sleep, never once complained about the ways pregnancy disrupted their carefully rebuilt equilibrium. The baby arrived in late November, a daughter with Caleb's dark eyes and Clara's stubborn expression. They named her Rose, after Clara's mother. Motherhood was a different kind of challenge than anything Clara had faced. The sleep deprivation was real and brutal. The constant demands left her feeling emptied out in ways sewing never had. She loved Rose fiercely, but some days she also mourned the autonomy she'd lost. "I don't know how to be both," she confessed to Margaret one afternoon while Rose napped. "A good mother and a good business owner." "You're not supposed to know. Nobody knows. We all just make it up as we go." Margaret poured more tea. "But here's what I learned raising 4 children while running a household. You can't be perfect at everything. Some days the children get the best of you and dinner is awful. Other days dinner is perfect and the children run wild. That's life." "That's not very comforting." "It's not supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be honest." Clara thought about that conversation often in the months that followed, about how perfection was a trap and balance was a myth. Some days she was a great mother and the shop suffered. Other days the shop thrived and she felt like she was failing Rose. But Rose grew anyway, happy, healthy, loved. And the shop continued succeeding with Sarah's management and Clara's reduced involvement. And the ranch prospered under Caleb's foreman and his own strategic oversight. They were doing it, not perfectly, but actually. James Hartley made one final attempt at disruption. Rose was 6 months old when James approached Caleb with an offer to buy the ranch. The price was generous, more than the property was worth by objective standards. Caleb told Clara about it that evening. He offered what? Double market value, said he's expanding his holdings and wants the property for development. Clara shifted Rose to her other hip. "What did you tell him?" "I told him no." Just like that. Just like that. Caleb took Rose, who immediately grabbed his beard. "This ranch is Samuel's legacy. It's our home. It's what we're building for Rose. No amount of money changes that." James didn't take the rejection well. He spent the next month making things difficult, spreading rumors about the ranch's financial stability, trying to poach Caleb's ranch hands, filing frivolous complaints with the county about property line disputes. But the community that had embraced Clara and Caleb defended them with the same fierce loyalty. Neighbors vouched for the ranch's integrity. Ranch hands refused James's offers. County officials recognized the complaints as harassment. James's influence, which had seemed so powerful when Clara first arrived, had limits. And the community had decided those limits were reached. Eventually, James moved on to easier targets. His saloon still operated, his loans still trapped desperate people. But his ability to intimidate Clara and Caleb specifically had been neutralized by their roots in the community. They'd become untouchable not through wealth or power, but through genuine belonging. Time passed in the way it does when life is full. Rose learned to walk, then talk, then argue with the same stubborn determination her parents possessed. The shop celebrated its 5th anniversary with a party that drew customers from 4 counties. The ranch expanded again, adding sheep to diversify beyond just cattle. Clara and Caleb settled into a rhythm that worked more often than it didn't. They still argued, still had moments of doubt, still struggled with balancing all the different demands on their time and energy. But they did it together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood on the ranch's front porch watching Rose play with the new foal Caleb had bought her. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in those familiar golds and purples Clara had first stitched into a quilt years ago. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Clara asked. "How do you mean?" "If you hadn't bought those quilts, if I'd gone to a different town, if any of 100 small things had been different." Caleb pulled her close. "I try not to. Seems like a waste of time wondering about paths not taken." "But aren't you curious?" "No, because this is the path I want to be on." He kissed the top of her head. "You, me, Rose, this ranch, your shop, this is the life I choose. The rest is just speculation." Clara leaned into him, watching their daughter laugh at something only a 6-year-old would find hilarious. She thought about the woman who'd arrived here with 7 quilts and a broken wagon, about how desperate and afraid she'd been. That woman wouldn't recognize this life, wouldn't believe it was possible, but it was. It was real and solid and built through choices made every single day. Not perfect choices, they'd made plenty of mistakes, but honest choices, brave choices. Choices to stay when leaving would have been easier, to trust when suspicion felt safer, to build instead of just survive. "I'm glad I stayed," Clara said quietly. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Rose ran up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Mama, did you see? The foal likes me." Clara scooped up her daughter, breathing in the scent of sunshine and grass and childhood. "I saw. He definitely likes you. Papa says I can name him. That's a big responsibility." "I know. I'm thinking Patches. Because he has patches." Caleb laughed. "Patches it is." They went inside as darkness settled, Rose chattering about her new horse and all the adventures they'd have together. Clara started dinner while Caleb built up the fire. Rose sprawled on the floor with paper and pencils, drawing what she insisted was a perfect likeness of Patches, but looked more like a potato with legs. This was it, Clara thought. This was the life she'd built from 7 quilts and stubbornness, and the kindness of a stranger who'd seen value where she couldn't. Not perfect, not easy, but hers. And that was more than enough. Years continued their steady march. Rose grew into a young woman with her mother's skill with fabric and her father's head for business. She learned to sew at Clara's side, though her real passion turned out to be breeding horses. The foal named Patches became the foundation of a small but respected breeding program that Rose ran with the same stubborn determination her parents had shown. The shop passed through several managers as Sarah eventually retired, but it remained a cornerstone of the town's economy. Clara stayed involved in an advisory capacity, teaching techniques to younger seamstresses and taking on special projects that interested her. But the desperate need to prove herself had faded somewhere along the way. Caleb's ranch became the standard other operations measured themselves against. He'd taken Samuel's foundation and built something remarkable, not through ruthless expansion, but through careful stewardship and genuine relationships with both animals and people. When younger ranchers needed advice, they came to Caleb. When the market shifted, his operation adapted. He'd become the kind of mentor Samuel had been to him. They weren't wealthy by the standards of big city business people, but they were prosperous in ways that mattered, respected in their community, comfortable in their home, surrounded by people who cared about them. Margaret passed away in Clara's 15th year in town, surrounded by family and the quilting circle that had been her second family. At her funeral, Clara stood and spoke about the woman who'd bought a building to help a stranger, who'd given advice without being asked, who'd shown Clara what community actually meant. "She told me once that we all get help starting," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tears. "That the question isn't whether we had help, but what we did with it. I hope I've answered that question in a way she'd approve of." The quilting circle continued without Margaret, though it was never quite the same. Clara eventually took on leadership, teaching younger women the patterns and techniques while maintaining the group's tradition of aggressive helpfulness toward anyone who needed it. James Hartley died in his 60s, alone in his big house with money in the bank, and nobody who genuinely cared he was gone. His property got divided among creditors and distant relatives who'd never visited. The saloon changed hands. The buildings he'd owned were sold off. Clara felt no satisfaction in his lonely end, just a kind of sad recognition that he'd chosen power over connection and paid the price. "Should we feel bad?" she asked Caleb the night they heard the news. "For what?" "For not feeling worse. He was a person. He mattered to someone, probably." "Maybe. But he spent his life hurting people and died the same way he lived, isolated by his own choices." Caleb pulled her close. "We can acknowledge that's sad without taking responsibility for it." Clara thought about that often in the months that followed, about how lives were shaped by choices made daily, how small decisions accumulated into entire destinies, how choosing connection over control, community over domination, made the difference between James's end and the life she and Caleb had built. On their 20th anniversary, the town threw a celebration that Clara hadn't approved and couldn't escape. Someone had organized a party at the church hall. Half the county showed up. "This is mortifying," Clara whispered to Caleb as they walked in. "This is love. Accept it gracefully." People gave speeches about the shop's impact on the local economy. about the ranch's contributions to the agricultural community, about Clara and Caleb as a couple, as business owners, as parents, as neighbors. Ruth, who was well into her 70s and still running the sandwich shop, stood up with tears in her eyes. When Clara first came to town, I tested her, made her fix a shirt right there in front of me to prove she could do the work. Ruth smiled at the memory. She passed that test and everyone that came after. This town is better because she stayed. We're all better because both of them stayed. Clara couldn't speak. The gratitude was overwhelming, not the desperate gratitude of early days when she'd needed help to survive, but the deep gratitude that came from being truly seen and valued by a community. Rose, now 17 and every bit as stubborn as her parents, gave a speech that had everyone laughing and crying. "My parents are the most annoying people I know," she said. "They still argue about everything. Mama overthinks simple decisions. Papa thinks he's always right, even when he's obviously wrong." People laughed, but they taught me something important. They taught me that building something that lasts means showing up even when it's hard, means asking for help when you need it, means trusting that people are generally good even when experience suggests otherwise. Rose looked at her parents. They came here with nothing and built everything, not because they were perfect, but because they were brave enough to keep trying. Clara wiped tears, trying not to ruin the makeup she rarely wore. Caleb's arm was solid around her waist, grounding her in the moment. This was what legacy looked like, not money or property or business success, though they had some of all three, but the impact they'd had on their community, the example they'd set for their daughter, the way they'd turned desperate beginnings into something sustainable and good. The party continued late into the night. Clara danced with Caleb, with Rose, with neighbors and friends and people whose lives had intersected with hers in 1,000 small ways over 20 years. She ate cake and laughed at stories and felt the kind of bone-deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged. As the evening wound down and people started leaving, Clara stood outside the church hall, looking at the town she'd stumbled into 2 decades ago. It had grown some, new buildings, more people, better roads, but the essence remained the same. A place where people helped each other, where community mattered more than individual ambition, where strangers could become family if they were willing to stay and try. "Ready to go home?" Caleb asked, appearing beside her. "Yeah, Rose already left with friends?" "Of course, we're apparently too old to be seen with on a Saturday night." Clara smiled. "We are old. We're experienced. There's a difference." They walked to the wagon, newer than the one Clara had arrived in, but still practical rather than fancy. The drive home was familiar, the road one they'd traveled thousands of times. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked as they neared the ranch. "Taking a chance on a desperate woman with overpriced quilts?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Not once. Best investment I ever made." "I wasn't an investment." "Sure you were. I invested time, energy, belief. Got back more than I could have imagined." He glanced at her. "What about you? Regret staying?" Clara thought about it, really thought, about the fear and doubt and struggles, about the times she'd wanted to run, about how hard it had been to learn to accept help, to trust good things, to believe she deserved stability. "No," she said finally, "no regrets." The ranch appeared in the distance, lights burning in the windows Rose had left on. Home. Real, solid, earned. Clara had arrived here with 7 quilts, a broken wagon, and desperate hope that something might work out. She'd left behind debts and grief and the crushing weight of her father's failures. She'd found a community that claimed her, a man who loved her, a daughter who challenged her, a business that sustained her, a life that, while imperfect and sometimes difficult, was undeniably hers. That was the thing about second chances, Clara thought as Caleb helped her down from the wagon. They didn't come from luck or fate or outside intervention. They came from choosing to try again when giving up would be easier, from accepting help when pride said to refuse it, from building connections when isolation felt safer, from staying when every instinct said to run. Inside, Clara hung up her coat and looked around the home she and Caleb had built together. Rose's sketches of horses covered one wall. Caleb's ranch ledgers sat on the desk. Clara's latest quilting project lay across the chair. Evidence of lives lived fully, if imperfectly. "I love you," she said to Caleb, turning to face him. "I love you too." He smiled that smile that still, after 20 years, made her heart do complicated things. Thank you for those 7 quilts. Thank you for paying too much for them. Best money I ever spent. They went to bed that night wrapped in each other and the quiet satisfaction of a life well built. Morning would bring its challenges, it always did. The shop would need attention, the ranch would demand work. Rose would probably do something that required parental intervention, but they'd handle it, together, the way they'd handled everything else. Because that was the real lesson Clara had learned in 20 years. That strength didn't come from standing alone. It came from knowing when to reach out, when to accept help, when to build partnerships instead of empires. And that legacy wasn't measured in money or property or individual achievement. It was measured in the lives you touched, the community you built, the love you gave and received. Clara had arrived with nothing and built everything that mattered. And that, she thought, as sleep claimed her, was more than enough. It was everything.